He heard Gerard following behind him, breathing heavily. It was only a short walk from there to his father's solar. He pushed the door open with great effort. The years of not being used had rendered the locking mechanism stiff and the door squeaked on his hinges as he pushed it forcefully. He did not turn around to see if Gerard followed him but instead hastened over to his father's desk. He paused briefly to inspect it. It was beautiful. Made of driftwood and therefore decorated in all manner of intricately sea-washed patterns that even a master craftsman could never hope to imitate. He crouched down and blew on the thick layer of dust that had settled there after over a decade of neglect. Dust flew up and exposed the true beauty of the patterns. He smiled at it, remembering the times his father had let him sit on the desk when he was still a young boy and let him use the stamp to seal his letters shut. Then he stood up again and continued around behind the desk. He tucked open the top drawer on the right-hand side and pulled out the list that his father had made a decade prior. He cast his eyes down it, then smiled. Aemon Targaryen. Then he put the list back in the drawer and turned to leave the solar. He paused on the threshold and cast one long look back at his father's solar. He could feel Gerard's eyes on him from the maester's position just outside the door. "I will move in here next week, Gerard. Ask the servants to begin dusting and cleaning the room, please," he said quietly as he started walking up the passage again. "Very well, my lord." They carried on in silence until they arrived at Montford's solar. Oren was already outside it, looking tired and scruffy. His brother had wrapped a cloak around him but otherwise appeared to have stumbled blindly out of bed. He was not even wearing shoes and still had his night clothes on. "You could have put some proper clothes on, brother," he said as he cast his eyes up and down Oren's figure. He could feel his lip curling slightly and resisted the urge to demand his brother turn around and change. The servant said it was urgent. He nodded and pushed open his solar door, entering quickly. He held the door open to Oren, who did likewise for Gerard as they shuffled inside. A servant had clearly already entered. A fire was roaring in the fireplace and fruits and fish alongside a jug of water rested on the table nearby. On his desk burned several candles because, despite the light of day that was now beginning to trickle in through the keep's windows, his solar was on the side of the castle that got limited direct sunlight. Candles would always be necessary here. For once, Montford did not head to the armchairs around the fire but instead settled down behind his desk. He gestured at the two chairs on the other side and waited until Oren and Gerard were seated. "Read this," he said as he reached into the pocket of his cloak and grasped the scroll before thrusting it at his brother. Oren grabbed it quickly and read it even faster. Then he lifted his eyes from the scroll and gave Montford a baffled look. "He got our house words wrong." Montford smiled, both because his brother was as quick as he ever was and because his brother had used the word our. And they were their house words. Oren was the closest thing to a brother that Montford had ever had. The fact he was a bastard mattered little. He loved his brother, nothing would or could change that. "My lord," Gerard said, looking between the two brothers. Oren quirked his eyebrow at Montford, who nodded. Oren passed the scroll quickly to the maester, who read it quickly. Then he reread it, eyes moving far more slowly across the scroll the second time, his mouth open slightly and moving every now and then. "Do you see what I saw, Gerard?" Montford said when his maester had finished reading. "Yes, my lord." Montford nodded and reached forward to prise the scroll out of his maester's hands. Then he beckoned the two men to join him behind the desk as he grabbed a spare piece of parchment and a writing instrument. He ran his fingers of his left hand along the words of the scroll, pausing every now and then to write down a letter on the spare parchment with his right hand. Once he was done, he paused and looked at what he had written. Then he went back over the original scroll to ensure he had not missed anything. He hadn't. He leaned forward and held the original scroll out over the candle on his desk and watched as the scroll burnt into nothing but ashes. He turned his eyes back to the words written on the second piece of paper. Then he carefully began to separate the words the letters he had written down made up until 5 distinct words stood out. He smiled. "The pact ice and fire on it. How did you see it, brother?" Aemon Targaryen would not still be at the wall as a maester if his brain was addled. Even at the wall, maesters that are no longer able to serve are dismissed back to the citadel to live out the last of their days doing research. Montford responded, eyes on the words on the second scroll. Gerard taught us that when we were children you should pay more attention to your lessons, Oren, he teased gently. Then he continued, the fact that he got our house words the wrong way around indicated there was more to the letter than there first appeared. It is a grave offense to forget another house's words, yet still a further offense to forget your ally's words. House Valerian has been an ally of House Targaryen for hundreds of years. Our closest ally. They would no more forget our words than we would theirs. From there it was just a matter of working out the code, he continued. He stood and, grasping the second scroll in his hand, circled around the desk until he was facing his brother and Maester, who were still stood behind it. The first two sentences are the most obvious. Once I had realized it was the first letter of the first two words, T for to then H for help, and then the final letter of the last word in a sentence made the word there. I just had to go from there. Of course, he threw in a phrase that did not fit. The words on Galdane, for example, were not part of the code. But necessary despite it. What were they? A call to arms. A regent calling his banners. Telling us that we can be all that Corlys Valerian was. Oren heaved out a deep breath, right hand going to the pommel of his sword. What does he wish us to do? He wishes us to go to Essos to protect the Targaryen children and to let them know that Rhaegar's child lives. It took a few moments of processing for Montford's words to filter through Oren and Gerard. Montford studied their expression. Gerard got there first, his expression turned from confusion, to shock, to disgust, then to determination. Oren's expression mirrored Gerard's moments later. Both their faces had flashed the same emotions that Montford had less than an hour before. But he knew them both well, they were both as intelligent as the sharpest Maester and they were as loyal as the most devoted hound. They would not just be told that they were to help, they would want to help. Oren heaved out a sigh and pulled out Montford's seat to slump in it, wiping his hand down his face, a bastard born of rape. You cannot be serious, Montford. Rhaegar was no rapist, Oren. Come, you knew him as well as I did. He was a good man. He was our friend, Montford spat out, irritated with his younger brother. You cannot know that, Oren replied, cautious eyes locked on his brother. Then he sighed, I do not judge him for being a bastard. Who am I to judge? But others will. That is enough of a problem. If he is a bastard, Gerard said quietly. Montford flinched, eyes moving to his Maester. Rhaegar was no rapist, your brother is right, Oren. He crowned Lyanna Stark the Queen of Love and Beauty in front of the realm. For Rhaegar it was as good as declaring his intent, Gerard continued, eyes fixed on the desk. He chuckled darkly, eyes lifting to lock on Montford's. I was there. As you both were. Lyanna Stark did not look disgusted by his actions. She looked pleased. I do not believe it was rape. I never have. What's more, she was a Stark. I do not believe that she would have so easily thrown herself at Rhaegar if there was no marriage. Starks value their honor above all else. She was a child, and a fool, but I do not believe she would have made that big a mistake. You cannot prove that, Gerard, Oren said quietly. No, I cannot. Montford leaned back on his feet, tilting his eye to gaze at the ceiling of his solar. To him, the manner of the boy's birth did not matter. He was Rhaegar's son. But, Oren and Gerard raised good point. It would need to be dealt with carefully. What would you have me do, brother? Oren said, voice breaking through Montford's thoughts. Montford turned his attention back to his brother, whose eyes were alight with excitement. He was leaning forward as though ready to leave that instant. Montford smiled. It would be treachery to go and aid Daenerys and Viserys, Montford murmured, eyes on his brother. His brother curled his lip but let Montford continue, at least it would be if I had ever considered Robert Baratheon my king. Take 100 men. Watch them, get to know them. If you decide the time is right, then bring them here if you can. I trust your judgment. And the child in the north. He is safe there. I will write back to Aemon Targaryen to let him know that we have received his message and will stand by our oaths. Oren nodded and they settled into silence. Gerard eventually twitched slightly towards the food and water on the table near the fireplace. Montford nodded and gestured at his Maester, who hurriedly dashed over to the table and poured himself some water and then made himself a plate of food. Gerard settled down in the seat closest to the fire, traditionally the Lord's seat. But Montfort did not mind. Gerard was well over 70 name days. His friend deserved to have the best seat. He followed Gerard and heard Oran scraped his chair against the floor as he too made to follow them over. Once they were all settled and eating, Oran broke the silence. "How do you think he did it?" Montfort laughed. "The most honorable man in the 7 kingdoms. That is what everyone says about Ned Stark." He reached forward and snatched another strawberry and popped it into his mouth, feeling gleeful for the first time in years. Honorable men are beyond question. Ned Stark has always been considered to be beyond reproach. He tricked the entire realm by playing on his honor. Gerard nodded as he munched thoughtfully on some mackerel. He swallowed loudly and then said, "And who better to hide Rhaegar's son than a man considered by the king to be his best friend?" He barked out a laugh and then said, "When you think about it, it was so obvious. He goes south to find his sister and returns with a babe and his sister's bones. 3 members of the King's Guard were there including Arthur Dayne." He returned the man's word to his family. Why would 3 members of the King's Guard be there protecting a kidnapped girl instead of on the battlefield with Rhaegar? We should have known. It was right there in front of us. "So, Ned Stark is smarter than Westeros has given him credit for," Oran murmured, eyes on the fire. "And he is now in King's Landing. He will need those smarts, brother." 298 AC Eddard Stark. The Tower of the Hand was a miserable place. On the surface he supposed that many would find it beautiful, and it was truly beautiful. It arched up into the sky and towered high over King's Landing. Windows the whole way around provided an unencumbered view of King's Landing. The balcony was large and, when he was stood on it, he could miles in nearly all directions. He could hear the noise from the sea, the gentle lapping sometimes giving him a sense of peace. Inside, the desk and chair behind it were ornately carved and comfortable. The armchairs by the fireplaces were soft and easy to sink into. But despite all those things, Ned had been in King's Landing a moon by this point and he had hated every minute of it. He found no beauty in the Tower of the Hand. Just monotonous boredom and misery. He missed the north. He missed the rolling hills and the snowy winters, the forests and his godswood. He missed his sons, and he missed his wife. Gods, he missed it. King's Landing would never be home. The north was home. He shifted slightly in his chair and then leaned back, eyes fixed on the scroll that Grand Maester Pycelle had just given to him. The man had only just left the room, but Ned wanted to wait for a few more minutes, just to be sure. He had not expected Jon to write to him. He had expected the first missive he received from the north to be from Cat, not Jon. He resisted chewing his lip as he stared at it. Eventually he reached out, removing his hands from where they had been gripping the arms of his chair in an effort to not lunge across the desk and rip the scroll open. He moved slowly, carefully, as he leaned forward to grasp the scroll. He brought it up as close as he needed to in order to inspect the handwriting. Definitely Jon's. He heaved in a deep breath, praying that Jon was well, and then broke the wax seal and read its contents. "Father. Uncle Benjen informed me of who my mother is, and I now have a living sigil for both my father's house and my mother's. Thank you for keeping me safe all these years. Your son. Jon." Ned choked slightly, saliva and phlegm clogging up his throat, and hacked out a cough. A bit of spittle loosened and he carefully whipped his mouth. He read the message again. And then again, a third time. Then he rose and hurried over to the fire that was gently roaring in the fireplace. For Lyanna, he thought as he threw the scroll into the fire and watched it burn to dust. Never would he take such measures, but for Lyanna, for her son, he would. Anything for Jon. His mind turned to the last line of the letter. Your son. He blinked away the tears that had gathered in his eyes at the thought. Jon would always be his son. From the day Jon had been born and he had first held him in his arms until the day Ned drew his last breath. Always. He watched the fire crackling away. He wondered what Jon had meant by having a sigil for both his parents' house. Surely his son could not have managed to secure a dragon. Mayhaps an egg, but not a dragon. But then Jon had never been a liar. Quiet and solemn, but never a liar. Jon was too honorable for that, just like Ned. The closest to Ned in personality of all his children. His hand moved instructively to the pommel of his sword, and he sighed. He had yet to take his sword off him unless he slept. He did not feel safe in King's Landing. So, the weight of ice weighed him down. He turned his attention back to the letter. It did not say much, and he knew why. It was too dangerous to say much. But it left him with more questions than it did answers. Even if John did not have a sigil, although Ned was minded to believe that John at least had an egg, he knew who his father was now. This changed everything. He sighed again. He could not pretend that John did not know. What would John do now? What path would his son take? He ran his hand down his face, feeling every inch his age. He knew what John would do. His son would seek out Daenerys and Viserys. John had always wanted to be part of a family. From there, who knew? John was not minded for war, he knew that. But Daenerys and Viserys? Who knew? But the fact that Daenerys was to be married to Aekel with 100,000 men, it was a threat and a risk. One John did not even know about. Would the Targaryen children even accept John? He did not know. And, if John had managed to find a dragon, and gods know how his son had done it, then in a few years that would be an entirely different problem they would have to contend with. But he was sure now that, despite his words of assurance to Robert, war was coming. John would go to Daenerys and Viserys, and Ned could not stop him. And then, one day, be it 10 moons from now or 10 years, Ned would have to stand by John in the wars to come. Robert has sent assassins after the children, and even if they did not screed, the attempts would be enough for John once he heard. Family was everything to John, just like it was to Ned. He could not stand by Robert. Not now. John was his son and would always be his son. He needed to make plans. He would have to stay in King's Landing, he could not leave. He could not arouse suspicions. But his children he could try and get north. To safety before the war that loomed on the horizon arrived. He spun on the spot and crossed to the balcony, stepping out in the bright light. From his position high up in the Red Keep he could see the harbor. Ships from different kingdoms and houses littered the port. His eyes fell on the masts depicting the white merman of House Marndaly and those of the Rose of House Tyrell. Decision made, he strode to the door of his solar and wrenched it open. "Find Jory Castle and send him to me immediately. Then find my daughter, Arya, and send her to me," he said to the guards outside. One was already moving after the first instructions and was hurrying down the stairs and out of sight as he finished speaking. He shut the door behind him and hurried back to his desk, carefully grabbing some spare parchment and a pen. He crafted his note quickly. He only needed a few words to say what needed to be said. He had just finished putting down his writing implement when there was a knock at the door. "Enter," he called out, voice a bit rough. Jory entered, inclining his head as he did so. He shut the door behind him and turned to face Ned. "You asked to see me, my lord. You are leaving King's Landing tonight. Take Arya with you, collect her from her chambers. Just you and her. No one else. There is a Marndaly ship in the harbor, I can see the sails from here. Ask them for passage for tonight. They will do as you ask. When you get to White Harbor, ride straight to the wall, give this letter to my brother. No one else. If he is not there, then wait," Ned said, voice quiet and urgent as he handed over the letter, which Jory took and put carefully into a pocket. Jory blinked at him, then nodded. "And Lady Arya? Leave her at White Harbor if you can. If she will not stay, take her with you. I do not want her wandering the north alone." "Yes, my lord." "Anything else, my lord?" Ned shook his head and Jory turned around and made to leave the room. Then he lurched forward out of his seat slightly before Jory had a chance to open the door. "Keep her safe, Jory. Tell no one where you are going." Jory turned around, a concerned look flashing across his face, but nodded and opened the door. He did not look back and the door closed with a thump behind him. Ned settled back in his chair and rubbed his hand over his face. Arya was the easy one, she hated King's Landing. She would be pleased to go. And, if Ned was honest with himself, he knew she should never have come south. She did not belong in the south. She was just like Lyanna, a wild wolf. She would be safe in the north, and she would be happy. He should never have brought her south. He sighed. He knew he could not send Sansa back to the north, she still wanted to marry Joffrey and Ned had agreed to the betrothal. He could not break it, not without arousing suspicion. There was nothing to be done there. Maybe one day, particularly if the boy continued to prove himself deranged, but not today. Robert would understand his rationale for sending Arya to the north, but Sansa was a different story. He shifted slightly on his chair. She was so young and so naive. He had done her a disservice by protecting her, as he had done with all his children. He would do better. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. The door was pushed open, and Arya's head peeked around. Her hair was a bird's nest and messy with stray strands flying everywhere. She was caked in dirt and dust. He smiled at her. You asked to see me, father, she said as she let the door slam behind her and hurried over to his desk. She almost had to jump up into the seat, and he smiled softly at her as her legs swung. Are you happy here? She blinked at him and then shook her head vigorously, her face twisting in anger. No, I miss home. I miss Rob and I miss Jon. I want to go home. He nodded. He knew that all already, but hearing the confirmation was the kick he needed. If I offered to let you return to Winterfell, would you want to go? She nodded, her head up and down, hair flying everywhere. More strands slipped out of the attempt at a braid someone had done. You will leave tonight. Tell no one, not even Sansa. I have yet to inform Robert of my decision. Jory will collect you from your chambers, he said, eyes on Arya. A smile bloomed across her face. She jumped out of her chair and ran around the desk to throw herself at him. Thank you, father, she whispered, choking on her words. He hugged her back, tears blooming in her eyes. I'm making the right decision. Whatever happens next, Arya will be safe, and I can protect Sansa more easily if it is just her and I. 298 AC Jon Snow. He was over a week into his journey when he realized he needed to come up with a plan. They were settled at the mouth of a cave he had found in the northern mountains. The cave was perfect, a few hundred feet off the ground, but with a good, sturdy, and deceptively wide path leading up to it. He had only found it because of Ghost. It had no tracks on it, human or animal. It was perfect. Jon sighed and leaned against the wall by the mouth of the cave, staring out into the twilight at the trees in the valley beyond. Up here, away from man and beast, life seemed so simple, so easy. His mind had wandered, and he had relaxed for the first time in ages. On his lap, Winter, having had a small growth spurt and therefore approaching the size of a large cat, was purring in a manner that made him wonder if she was, in fact, part cat. Next to him, Ghost dozed with his head on the ground and tail flicking from side to side. After a week of camping at the tree line by the mountains, and having to take uneasy shifts with Ghost, it was nice to just relax for a few moments. The mouth of the cave offered an unencumbered view down the path that led up to it. They would see anyone coming and have an age to prepare. Suddenly, Winter launched herself off his lap into a weird little scuttle and crossed out the cave mouth and pounced on something. There was a quiet snap and then a short burst of flames. The entire thing took less than a few seconds, and Jon had only just begun to process how quickly she had moved when she started carefully dragging her kill over to him. At the far end of the cave, the horse let out an affronted neigh and then turned away from the scene. She deposited it in front of him like a mother bird offering food to her child. When he stared blankly at her, she shrieked angrily and nudged it at him more forcefully with her snout. He grimaced. She shrieked again and shoved it forward until it was touching his foot. He flinched and looked at her offering. The charred remains of the baby fox were still freshly smoking. But at least it looked cooked. He looked back at Winter. She maintained eye contact for a second and then lunged forward, teeth tearing through the back of the fox cub's rear with ease. He flinched again but withdrew a knife from its sheath. He was hungry. He skinned the fox cub carefully as Winter moved back and, once the meat was ready to be eaten, he carefully held some out to Winter and then to Ghost before he took the first bit for himself. He grimaced at the taste. Venison or boar it was not. But it would do. Between the three of them they made quick work of the meal. He leaned back afterwards and surveyed the remains. Fox fur was used on the cloaks in the north, and, had Winter been a bit cleaner in the direction of her flames, the skin might have been salvageable enough for him to use the fur to keep him warm in the mountains. Summer it might be, but the mountains were always cold at night. The cool mountain breeze whipped through and made his skin tingle. It was only the warmth of Ghost next to him that stopped him shivering. He was spared from any further thoughts about what to do with the fox remains as Winter carefully shoved the remains back outside the cave with her snout. "At least you're clean," he grumbled quietly as she returned and settled back down on his lap. She gazed up at him with a baleful expression. "Sometimes I wonder if you can understand me," he murmured, fingers tracing the outline of her jaw. She leaned into him and grumbled gently as he continued, "I know what your grumbles mean and what your actions say. Sometimes I even know what you will do before you do it. Much like Ghost. But it is different, something else." She gazed up at him and blinked languidly. Then she let out a tiny belch following by a puff of smoke and settled back down in his lap. He smiled at her and stopped stroking her. His hand extended towards Ghost, who shuffled over slightly so they were touching, and rested his head on the floor by John's feet. He buried his hand in Ghost's fur and flexed his fingers backwards and forwards. "I'll take first watch, my friend. Get some sleep," he murmured, eyes on the forest. ****. The next morning dawned bright and breezy. Despite the sun being low in the sky, the cave was bathed in a gentle light. A cold chill swept through the air and John shivered as he stretched his arms and legs as he woke up slowly. "Gods, I miss my feather bed," he muttered as his shoulders cracked. Ghost and Winter peered up at him with baleful eyes. Then Ghost rose to his feet and stretched, his back paws extending out at the same time his front paws did. He looked twice as long as he normally did. He settled back down next to John with a large yawn. "We need to decide what to do," John said as he settled back against the wall. He paused, then fished around in his cloak pocket for an apple. He pulled it out and took a large bite. "You don't like apples," he said when Winter and Ghost turned their eyes on him. "We cannot stay here forever. I don't know when winter will arrive, but it could be within the year. We need to decide what to do. I could go back to Winterfell, I could go to any of the northern houses, and they would take me." Winter let out what could only be described yawn and settled back down. Clearly, she didn't care about his worries. "I cannot go to Essos." "You cannot travel on a ship," he said, eyes fixed on Winter as he took another bite of his apple. He sighed. "We will stay here for a few more days, gather supplies, and then we will continue to head south. I'll decide what to do before we leave the mountain range." He settled back against the wall to eat his apple, mind turning to his family. He wondered how Wild Arya was getting on in the south, whether she had managed to get into any trouble. He smiled to himself, she almost certainly had. Sansa was likely loving King's Landing and all the privileges that came with being daughter to the Hand of the King. He sighed. He loved Sansa, but she had not made it easy and had never wanted to know him, but he loved her regardless. The change in his parentage did not change that. He thought about Bran, he hoped his brother would wake up soon. He resolved to find a weirwood tree and pray to the old gods. Then he thought of Rickon, who probably did not even remember him anymore. He thought of his father in the south, likely not to return for years. Then his mind turned to Daenerys and Viserys. He hoped they were safe and that he would meet them, one day. Then he thought of his father. He hoped his father understood that the choice was made for him, that he could not look back, he could only go forwards. One day, just as Uncle Aemon had promised, he would have to go to war for Winter because Robert Baratheon would not rest once he found out dragons lived again in the world. And Jon would never let anyone hurt his dragon, his family. Jon sighed and shifted slightly. He had been angry for so many days over what his father had done to him. Some nights he had laid awake glaring at the ceiling, quietly cursing his father. And then other nights he had nearly cried himself to sleep. He knew why his father had done it. But that did not make it any easier to accept. His father had done his best though. His father loved him. He knew that, and it made all the pain and heartache he had suffered worth it. Even if his father did not support him in his actions or even understand his actions, he knew that his father would still love him, and that mattered more than anything else. Finally, as the sun began to rise fully behind the tree line, his mind turned to his mother. He wondered what she would do. Where would she go if she were him? Who would she trust to keep her son safe? Who would never betray Lyanna Stark and her son? Suddenly he knew where he was to go. Greywater Watch, he breathed out. Interlude, 298 AC Aemon Targaryen, flashback. Do you think she would have been proud of me? John asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over the room after the door had closed behind them. They were all gathered together in Eamon's chambers, as they did every evening under the guise of helping inform John's decision about whether to join the Maestas or the Night's Watch. Benjen was settled on the floor by the fire with Ghost curled up around him. John sat on the edge of Eamon's bed and Eamon was tucked up under his covers, leaning back against his fluffed pillows. Next to him on a spare cushion, the dragon snored gently. Eamon stayed silent. This was a matter for Benjen to discuss with John. This was his family, not Eamon's. In what way, nephew? Benjen asked gently. Just, proud of me. Eamon gave Benjen a slightly grumpy look. It was clear the boy was looking for reassurance, and Benjen was being remarkably slow on the uptake. Their eyes met and Benjen's eyes widened as though he realized what John was really asking. She would have been so proud of you. You are kind, you are good, you are intelligent, you are perceptive, you are patient, you are honest, and you are loyal. They are all traits that she held in high regard, and she would have been delighted that you are you. She would have loved that you had a direwolf and a dragon that you loved. She loved animals. What was she like? I will start by appearance first, for that is what everyone always mentions first, and then tell you about her. Benjen said softly, and when John nodded, he pressed on. Many alive today will say she was beautiful. That is what they will say when you ask them about Lyanna. Lyanna Stark was beautiful. That is all they will say. But they do not remember her like I do, and they did not know her like I did. Your father was away at the Eyrie for much of his childhood. And Brandon, he was always off doing what he wanted. Lyanna and I were closest in age, born less than 12 moons apart. I knew her better than any other man alive today. She was my best friend, Benjen murmured. She was not as beautiful as they say? John asked, his eyes fixed on his uncle Benjen. Benjen turned away from the flames. Not in the way that many people consider beautiful. In her death people have rewritten history to suit their description of her. They paint her as some silly, high-born maid, who would have grown out of her wild ways and been the perfect beautiful wife to pop out babies for Robert Baratheon. That was not Lyanna. She was wild. She was untamed. Arya looks so much like her. If you ever do want to know what your mother truly looked like, think about Arya. Do not think about that statue in the crypts at Winterfell. That does not do her justice, not in looks and not in capturing what she was like in life. Lyanna was proud and fierce. She did not need anyone's help to do anything. She could look after herself. She enjoyed the tilts and swordplay. She was better than I at archery. Anything you would expect a son to master, Lyanna had mastered it first, Benjen said softly. He winced and then smiled at John. She was my superior in every possible way. She outskilled me at everything. You loved her. More than anything. Much like you and Arya. John gave a wry smile, his eyes watering slightly as he clearly thought about his favorite sister. Arya is better than me at archery, he murmured. As Lyanna was with me, Benjen replied gently. Then he continued, she would have made a better son than a daughter. She had no time for needlework or manners, she just wanted to be free. She loved riding. She would have spent every day for the rest of her days on saddleback if she had been able. She was the best rider I have ever seen. I suppose all those reasons are why so many people described her as wild in her youth. And she was wild, John. She was so full of life. Nothing and no one could have tamed her. Robert Baratheon thought he loved her. He did not know her. She would never have been happy with him and he with her. I know he told Ned often that he loved her and that he was unable to move on from her, but he did not know her. If he had, he would have run. She would have eaten him alive. He would have had affair after affair searching for what she could not give him. Do you think she loved my father? John said quietly. Benjen sighed and turned back to the flames. I do not know, John, but I know that Lyanna would have fought if she were kidnapped. She would have fought the whole world by herself to get back to the north. And she would have won or died trying. Nothing could have stopped her. John nodded but did not say anything. I wish I could give you the assurance that you need to know that it was not rape, John. But I cannot make those promises when I do not know, Benjen said softly. But what I do know is that she asked Ned to keep you safe, and he has spent 6 and 10 years doing exactly that. I have my quarrels with my brother, but he kept you safe. Eamon smiled, finally glad to have confirmation for Jon that Lyanna had loved Jon, and interjected before Jon could. A woman, regardless of what people will tell you, does not ask a man to protect a child she does not love. Women are just as capable of hating their children as men are. She loved you. Take comfort in that, nephew. Regardless of the nature of your birth, you were loved. That is more than many people in this life have. There was a long silence, during which Benjen and Eamon shared a long look. Eamon turned his gaze to Jon, who was staring at his lap as though considering if he wanted to know any more. Did she have any friends? Other than you, uncle? Jon eventually asked. Howland Reed, Benjen replied. When Jon lifted his eyes to give Benjen a slightly baffled look, Benjen continued, they met at the tourney at Harrenhal. Howland was attacked by 3 squires and my sister came to his rescue. He joined us for the feast that evening, and they barely parted ways for the rest of the tourney. They wrote to each other nearly twice a week for the rest of her life. She spoke fondly of him, and he was there when your father found her in the Tower of Joy. He knows about me. Jon breathed out. Eamon's eyes swung back to Benjen. That was a rather crucial bit of the story that Benjen had omitted during their initial discussion. He knows. And he has not told anyone in 6 and 10 years, Benjen said quietly. He loved your mother. Just as Ned did. Together they brought you back from the Tower of Joy and took care of you. He lied to Robert Baratheon to keep you safe, as your father did. There is not a man more honorable, more loyal, or more worthy of trust in the whole of the 7 kingdoms than Howland Reed. Chapter 6, Home. Chapter Text. Chapter Summary, Varys changes Ned Stark's fate. Eamon receives a response from Montford Valerian. In our interlude, we see one of Rhaegar's letters to Eamon. Notes, everything from now goes or. Strap in, folks. 298 AC. Ned Stark. The Godswood of the Red Keep was nothing compared to the one in Winterfell. If the one in Winterfell was one of, if not, the greatest in Westeros, then the one in the Red Keep was near the bottom of the list. It was less than an eighth of the size of the one in Winterfell, which spread over 3 acres, and the tree within was a brown oak and not a weirwood. It was a sad specimen that did not have the strength or deep roots that the one in Winterfell did. But it was still a godswood. And, if he tried half enough, he felt like he could feel the presence of the gods. But even if the gods were not present, it was peaceful. He could hear the water flowing in the black water rush and the birds singing. No one came to his part of the Red Keep. Sansa had never prayed to the old gods, and Arya was gone. It was just him. He missed Arya. She had been gone near a moon now and would, by his estimation, be at White Harbor by now, even if the winds had not been fair. But likely she was well on her way to the Wall. He knew his daughter well. She would not have stayed in White Harbor when requested. He did not worry for her though, for Arya had long been able to take care of herself, despite being a child, and Jory was one of his most trusted men. She was safer than she had been since she had left the safety of Winterfell's walls, and, despite what Cat might beg him to do, he would never force Arya to leave again. Gods, he wished he could have gone with Arya. He missed his wife, and he missed his sons. He wanted to see Bran, awake and alive, for himself. He wanted to sit in front of the weirwood tree of Winterfell, as his father and grandfather had done before him, and know that he would never need to leave again. He should never have come south. He gazed at the oak tree and sighed quietly to himself. He could almost feel himself relaxing. But not completely. He would not relax until he was back in Winterfell, where he belonged. He had a constant sense he was being watched. Even during his trip to the blacksmiths on the Street of Steel the other day, he had felt he was being watched. He had never noticed it before, if he was being watched not before Jon's letter had arrived. But ever since he had read Jon's words, it was as though there was a pair of eyes on him all the time. Mayhaps it was guilt speaking. But it didn't feel like guilt, it felt like he was being watched. He shifted his weight a bit, hands clasped behind his back. His mind turned to Jon. His son. Lyanna's son. But his son in every way that mattered. He had to protect him. He might not know what Jon was planning, but he had raised Jon to be honorable and good. Jon would not strike first, he knew that. But his son would defend his family to his last breath, and he would find Daenerys and Viserys somehow. And when that day came, war would come crashing down on them all. The North needed allies. Ned needed allies. He needed to start making preparations, but he could not in King's Landing. His hands were tied. He could not arouse suspicion. He was stuck, knowing he had to act but being unable to. He had never felt so powerless in his life. He sighed again. He hoped that war would not come until Robert was gone from this world and not until he was safely back home in the North. He would always pick Jon, but he hoped that if the gods were watching him, they would answer his prayers and make it so that Robert would never need to know. Joffrey, if Joffrey was what Ned thought he was as the other children were, then it would not be betrayal. His conscience would rest more easily. And even if they were not, Joffrey would never make a good king and Jon and his family would never be safe with a Lannister on the throne. Lord Stark, a soft voice said from behind him, wrenching him out of his thoughts. Lord Varys, he returned, eyes still on the oak tree. I hope you do not mind some company. All are welcome before the gods. Varys did not respond, but the soft crunching of the earth told him that the man was heading in his direction. He could feel his spine tensing. Ever since he had received Jon's letter he had been on edge, and now was no different. He had never felt safe or at home in King's Landing, and now he was even less comfortable. The man paused when he drew level with him, and Ned eyed him carefully out of the corner of his eye. Do you find peace here? Varys said conversationally after several minutes of silence had passed. On occasion, he said softly. And he did find peace when he was alone. I hope you do not mind me saying that you made a wise decision in sending Lady Arya home, Varys continued as though Ned had not spoken. Starks do not belong in King's Landing. He resisted flinching and kept his eyes fixed on the tree. There was a long pause. You are getting better, Lord Stark. Lord Varys. You're learning how to play the game. I am not playing a game. Yes, you are. I do not know to what end, but you are, the man said, as he turned to face Ned. You are burning letters in your chambers now instead of leaving them laying around. You sent your daughter away rather than keep her here, despite there being no apparent reason to send her away. You are looking over your shoulder more often. You are thinking before you speak. Ned turned in response and they gazed at each other for a few moments. You seem to have an extraordinary interest in what I am doing, Lord Varys. Then Varys smiled, what appeared to be a true smile rather than the grimace he often had on his face during small council meetings, and said, I have an interest in what everyone is doing, Lord Stark. But if you are trying to play the game, then you need to learn faster. Ned did not respond and instead turned back to face the tree. I do not say this to criticize, but to help. I have been watching you, Lord Stark. My little birds have been watching you. You may well be one of the few good men in Westeros, but being a good man will get you killed. Thank you, Lord Varys. I will take your words under consideration, he said softly. Then, where Lord Varys did not leave, he continued, is there something else you require? 2 things. The first is that the king has called a small council meeting we should be gathering now. And the second. Stop your investigation into what Jon Arryn was doing and the king's bastards. You still have 1 child in this city. Ned froze. It is my job to know what everyone in the kingdom is doing, Lord Hand. You should be more worried about the people who are not me that know what you have been doing. You sent 1 child away, I presume to keep her safe and happy. Do not risk the life of your other child on a fool's errand. Better men, wiser men, and more powerful men than you have died looking at the same thing you are, Varys said quietly. I will tell the king you are finishing off a prayer to the old gods for your son, Bran. Take some time to compose yourself. He will not start the meeting without you. Ned did not reply, keeping his eyes fixed on the leaves on the oak tree. Next to him Varys turned and then paused. You should leave King's Landing, Lord Stark. I do not know what is going on that requires you to burn letters, but if it is linked to your investigation into what Jon Arryn was doing, then you will end up dead. You are a good man. You love your children. You live with honor. You are, perhaps, the only friend our king has. But kings do not live forever, and even Robert cannot protect you from what is coming. Take my advice, Lord Stark. Leave King's Landing at the first opportunity that is presented to you and do not look back. Ned waited until the crunch of feet faded and he was completely alone before he spun on the spot. He walked in a wide circle around the Godswood, making sure it was empty, and then he settled on the ground with his back against the great oak and finished his prayers, tears sliding down his face. ****. It did not take him long to finish his prayers or for the tears to subside and head to the small council meeting room with his guards falling into place behind him once he left the Godswood. He walked quickly, none of his earlier melancholy showing in his posture or his steps. He now had confirmation he was being watched. He could not falter. He could not show weakness. Before he entered, he took one more deep breath to steady himself and then pushed the door open. Once he had crossed the threshold and the door closed separating him from his guards, he bowed deeply. "My apologies, Your Grace," he said loudly, eyes fixed on the floor. "None of that, Ned," Robert boomed out. "Lord Varys explained your delay. Come. Sit." Ned straightened and walked swiftly to the chair that was left on Robert's right. He sat down quickly, eyes fixed on Robert. He had not looked at Robert before he had sat down and so had failed to notice the scrunching of his friend's eyes or the dark lines underneath. His mouth was downturned, and his hands were braced flat down on the table. He looked furious. Bad news. Ned scrambled quickly to try and think of what could have angered Robert so. The king had been angry when he had found out that Ned had sent Arya home, but it was more disappointment than true anger. The look on Robert's face now was rage. He was spared being able to put much thought into the matter by Robert speaking. "Lord Varys, tell the table what news you have from Essos." "Daenerys Targaryen is pregnant," Lord Varys said shortly. Ned turned so swiftly in his seat that he heard his neck crack. He stared at the eunuch. The man gave nothing away. He sat straight in his seat with his hands up his sleeves and an air of complete neutrality and calm on his face. Ned had never hated the man more. He could have told Ned in the peace of the Godswood. He could have tipped him off so that Ned might have time to consider how best to calm Robert down. The anger that was bubbling under Robert's skin could have been calmed if only Ned had been given time. "Robert," he began, desperate to stop his friend's rage. "Silence, Ned!" Robert roared. He flinched back. Robert stood, raging over the table, his blue eyes so dark they were nearly black. He slammed his hand on the table, and it shook with the force of the blow. "I warned you. I warned Jon Arryn. I warned everyone of what would happen when that bitch reached adulthood and married. Now she is pregnant. This is no longer speculation. They are a threat. You ignored me. You told me not to worry. You did not listen. You will damn well listen now. I want her dead. I want her fucking child dead, and I want her inbred brother dead. I want them all dead." Silence echoed around the chamber. "She is 14 years old. She is a child," he hissed at Robert. "And the Dothraki will not cross the narrow sea. As I counseled you before, she is no threat to you. Her child is no threat to you. She is half a world away. Her child is not even born yet. Neither of them are a threat to you. She is a Targaryen. She is half a world away. Do not let the ghosts of the past influence your actions now." "How sure are you, Lord Varys?" Lord Renly said from his place halfway down the table before Robert could respond to Ned's plea. "Ser Jorah brought me the news. He would not lie." Ned barked out a laugh. "Yes, a man who sells people into slavery is definitely a trusted source." Lord Renly leaned back in his chair and, ignoring what Ned said, continued, "Then we can be sure it is true. Ser Jorah has not misled us yet." He turned to Robert and said more loudly than was necessary given they were so closely clustered around the table, "You listened to Jon Arryn for years, brother. It was a mistake. Do not make the same mistake again." "A mistake? Since when did mercy become a mistake? Since when did the small council of Westeros spend its time plotting the murder of innocent children?" Ned bit out angrily. "There are no innocent Targaryens, Ned." He flinched again. Then he pushed his chair back with a loud thud and braced both hands on the table. "I will not be party to the murder of 2 children to make you feel more secure in your reign, Robert. They are no threat," he said. Then he heaved in a deep breath and said the words he had been holding in for over 15 years, I kept my silence over what happened to Rhaenys and Aegon. I will not do it again. I kept my silence over what happened to Jon's brother and sister. Silence echoed around the chamber. Across from him, Ned saw Varys' eyes widened momentarily before his usual placid expression slid across his face. Ned ignored the eunuch and turned back to Robert. Robert's rage was greater than Ned had ever seen it, his usually bright blue eyes were nearly pitch black and he was quivering even as he loomed over the table. With both of them standing over the table, Robert had nearly half a head on Ned and more weight. His once friend made an impressive sight even if his figure was no longer trim. He stared into Robert's eyes wondering how they could have ended up here. But he knew how it had happened. Targaryens. Robert would never be happy whilst a Targaryen drew breath. Whilst Jon's family draws breath. Whilst Jon draws breath. If I may, your grace. Varys simpered and when Robert nodded still without taking his eyes off Ned pressed on, if Lord Stark, as your hand, is unable or unwilling to carry out actions to secure the safety and security of your rule then he cannot continue as your hand. No one spoke for a moment. Then Ned nodded. Leave King's Landing at the first opportunity that is presented to you and do not look back. Realizing he was still standing, he straightened from his position braced on the table. He cast his eyes down to the pin on his chest and unfastened it. Then he placed it on the table. It clattered down, despite the fact he had not slammed it down forcefully and he hid another flinch at the sound that echoed in the silence. I agree with Lord Varys. I cannot serve as your hand. I will not serve a man who would advocate the murder of an unborn babe and its child mother. To do so would make me no different from the men that served Aerys when he murdered my brother and father. He made to turn from the table. Do not turn your back on me, Ned. Robert spat. Ned paused and turned his eyes back on his once friend. You mean to turn your back on me? On my rule? Robert said, his hands still braced on the table and his entire body quivering in rage. No. But I will not provide counsel to a man unwilling to listen and who cowers at the thought of a babe in its mother's belly. You will have my support for your reign, your grace. But you will have it from Winterfell. Not from here. There was a long silence. Get out. Ned did as bid. As soon as the door slammed shut behind him, he said quietly to Wyl who was closest of all his guards, all of whom were gazing at him with a mixture of shock and horror of their faces, go find my daughter. Take her straight to the docks. Tell her it is an order from her father and make sure no one follows you. Take 20 men with you. I will meet you there. If I am not there within 2 hours, get her on a ship and go north with any of the household who are there. Wyl did not respond but instead broke away from the group and headed towards the gardens when Sansa had last been seen. Ned watched him go. The man's walk was swift and purposeful but not stressed or worried. A good man. A smart man. Ned picked up the pace as he hurried towards his solar. He walked as Wyl had walked, swiftly but without looking like he was worried or stressed. He was less than halfway down the corridor that led to it when he saw Veon Poole and his daughter. Thank the gods. Veon. Head to the docks. Take only what you have on you. Do not return to your rooms. Sansa and I will meet you there. Take any of our household that you see on your way with you. The man nodded and grasped his daughter by her hand. Then he spun on the spot and dragged her off in the direction of the courtyard and from there to the city and docks beyond. My lord Hood said quietly from behind him. Ned did not stop walking but inclined his head, indicating he was listening. Send me to find the rest of the household. He paused. Then he nodded, be quick but subtle. It is close to the midday meal, they should be on their way to the hall to eat. My lord Hood said. Then he was gone. Ned pressed on, picking up speed as he reached the door of his solar. He opened the door to his solar quickly, letting it slam shut behind him as he hurried over to his desk. Once there, he grabbed the bag of gold dragons he had stuffed inside one of his drawers and, without giving his solar one last look, turned and strode back out the door. He picked up speed as the door closed behind him, ice swinging with the force of his stride. He and the guards who remained with him made quick work of exiting the Red Keep, Word of his resignation had clearly not filtered through to the guards at the entrances, as no one treated them any differently to how they usually would. He walked swiftly through the streets of King's Landing, weaving his way away from the direction of the docks towards his target. His nose curled at the smell as the stench of flea bottom washed over him. He would not miss this. Those people deserved better. One day, he hoped they would get what they deserved. The shop on the Street of Steel was as it had been mere days before. Toib Homart greeted him with a deep bow and a booming, "Lord Hand." "The boy, is he here?" The man nodded, his eyes flickering slightly at the tone of Ned's voice, and then belted out, "Gendry," loud enough that it could be heard over the sound of metalwork from the various shops. Robert's bastard emerged quickly. When he saw Ned, his eyes widened and then a blank expression slid across his face. "Lord," the boy said politely and inclined his head. "How good is he?" Ned said brusquely to Toib Homart. "What is he worth?" 20 gold dragons. "Will he be safe?" "For your silence and for the boy. He will be gone from the city by nightfall, and I will keep him safe." "You have my word as a Stark," Ned said after he had reached into his clock. Then he dumped the bag of gold dragons, at least 50 pieces, onto the table between himself and Toib Homart. The man's eyes widened and then he nodded. "Boy, you're going with the Lord Hand." "I am not finished." "The day is not done," the boy complained. "You are," Ned said softly. "I am leaving King's Landing and you are coming with me. I need a new smith in Winterfell and your skill is already excellent. You will have your own forge and as much equipment as you need. You will live in the castle and be part of my household. You will have heard about me by now. I have been in this accursed city long enough. I will treat you well." The boy gave him a suspicious look. Then his eyes darted to Toib Homart, who nodded once. Eventually, Gendry nodded and then he turned and strode back through the shop towards where he had been at the back and grabbed the helm that he had shown Ned only days before. "If you ever wish for a new life, Master Smith, you will be welcome in the north," Ned said in an undertone, loud enough to be heard by Toib Homart but quiet enough that no one else would hear. The man nodded and then schooled his face into a blank expression as Gendry came hurrying back. "You do not have anything else?" Ned remarked as they turned and left the shop. The boy shook his head. "Very well. Keep your eyes down and stick close to me. I mean to be gone from this city as soon as possible." Together Ned and Gendry walked through King's Landing swiftly, keeping to the back streets, as they headed towards the docks. When they got there, Ned saw all his household, including the Septa who had Sansa gathered in her arms, stood near a Mandaeally ship with Wyl deep in discussion with a man he knew well. He smiled. "Lord Wendell," he called out. The man froze and turned to look at him, eyes wide. A smile slid across his face. "Lord Stark," he responded, even as he inclined his head. Ned walked swiftly up to him, Gendry and his guards following. "I did not expect to see you here," Ned said once he drew level. Wendell gave him a puzzled look. "My father received a raven from you a moon ago, requesting that a Mandaeally ship remain docked in King's Landing for the foreseeable future. There were no other instructions. I arrived less than a week ago. I had thought to see you before now." Ned stared at him. "Varies." He felt his eyes widen and then he carefully schooled his face into a more relaxed expression. "My lord," Wendell said softly. "Thank you, for responding so swiftly," he replied. Then he smiled. "You are ready to leave?" "Aye. Enough rations for 2 moons in case the seas are poor. As soon as your household are boarded, we can set sail. You have ravens on board?" "1. To go to White Harbor." He nodded then turned to face his household, his eyes lingering on Sansa who looked terrified even as her Septa held her close. "Get on the ship. As soon as the last of you is on, we leave and head home." Later that afternoon, as the sun began to set on the horizon, Ned stood on the deck on the Mandaeally Carrock staring at King's Landing as it faded into the distance. He had made his decision. He had made it more than 15 years ago. He would stand by Jon. He just hoped the Lords of the North could forgive him. And he hoped that he would not regret his flee from the accursed city he was leaving behind. "Lord Stark." Wendell Mandaeally's voice said quietly from behind him. "Lord Wendell," he responded as he inclined his head indicating that he was willing to be disturbed. "Is all well, my lord?" He sighed. I do not know, he replied, eyes fixed on the red keep and his mind whirring. Where is the Raven? In the captain's cabin. He nodded. Write to your father. Tell him to send 500 men to reinforce Moat Cailin and to inform Robb what he has done. 500. That is enough to garrison the moat. My lord, why are we putting a garrison in Moat Cailin? Ned sighed and wrenched his eyes away the red keep to meet the worried eyes of Wendell Marndale, because 15 years ago, Tywin Lannister's men murdered Rhaenys and Aegon Targaryen, and Robert laughed. And I did nothing when I found out. I did not even raise it with Robert. I thought it would never happen again. I could not change what had happened, and so I kept my silence. Never again. Today I resigned my post as Hand of the King because I would not be party to the murder of Daenerys Targaryen and her unborn babe. I will not betray my king, but I will not risk the north. We reinforce the moat until we can be sure that you will not be punished for my actions today. Lord Wendell did not reply. His mouth was set firm, and his eyes were flinty. There was a long pause, and then he said, I will write to my father and tell him to send 1,000 men to reinforce the moat. There was another pause, and then Lord Wendell said more softly, voice barely above a whisper, you did the right thing, Lord Stark. There is not a man in the north who would countenance the murder of an unborn babe. Ned nodded and murmured, thank you, before he turned his attention back to the red keep as it became nothing but a speck on the horizon. He hoped he got north and to Jon before the assassins reached Daenerys and word reached his son. He had to speak to Jon first. Jon had to know that Ned had not done this. He had to. 298 AC Aemon Targaryen. Clydas had been frustrated when Aemon had said that he no longer needed support in reading ravens that were received. But he had not stayed annoyed for long, as Aemon had quickly distracted him with the offer of access to what remained of the library at Castle Black. Chet had not taken the move away from serving Aemon well, but Aemon was trying not to dwell on it. Despite the worry over what was happening with Jon and how Jon was getting on, life went on. Everything changed a bit, but nothing had really changed. His new steward, Samwell Tarly, was a good man, but it was hard to convince him to leave Aemon to his business. Chet and Clydas had, at least, been more than willing to leave Aemon to himself. Samwell seemed keen to prove his usefulness whilst also determined to be as unhelpful as possible. Not the best qualities in a steward. But the boy was intelligent, and he was wasted on the wall if Aemon was honest. He would learn, and Aemon recognized the boy's keenness for what it really was, a desire to be spared the life of a ranger, and so he cut the boy more slack than he otherwise might. And, if on occasion, Samwell Tarly overstepped, he tried not to berate the lad too hard. He was a good lad with a good heart. He deserved better than the wall, as many of the men here did. This night, however, he found his patience waning. Samwell was wittering on about all manner of nonsense, including the reports from beyond the wall that the wildlings were gathering in large numbers as they had done countless times in Aemon's memory, and all Aemon wished to do was close the door to his chambers and wait for Benjen in peace. The wind whipped past his face again, and he repressed a shiver, wishing he had never opened the door to his chambers, for the fire within was sure to be going out due to the force of the wind. He should have known that Samwell would keep him busy for several more minutes. Eventually, when Samwell took a breath, Aemon had time to speak. Let us discuss this in the morning, Samwell. I grow tired and the cold is not good for my breathing, he said quickly. Then, when Samwell made to speak again, presumably to apologize for his wittering and to witter some more, he hastily added, head to your own bed, but before you do, please can you send for Benjen Stark, please? The man was not yet heading off towards where the rangers slept before Aemon had closed the door hastily. He leaned against it heavily, his back bracing him upwards despite the ache in his bones. He sighed. He ran his hand down into the pocket of his cloak, feeling around for the scroll that was crumpled up inside. He felt himself relax slightly when he managed to grasp it. He straightened and bustled over the hearth. The fire he had left roaring inside when he had headed out to his evening meal had spluttered and begun to die. Next time he would have to be firmer with Samwell to get him to leave. He gave the fire a careful prod and gently dropped some more wood on it. It took a few moments, but the flames picked up. He nodded to himself. 2 quick raps and then 3 longer ones sounded. Come in, Benjen, he called out as he held his hands carefully over the fire to soothe the chill that was creeping into his bones. A draft entered the room when Benjen did as bid, and the fire flickered in an alarming way that suggested it might go out altogether, but the draft was quickly shut off by the man hastily shutting the door. The fire picked back up. "It's freezing in here," Eamon Benjen hissed out as he hurried over to the fireplace and stuck his hands out over the heat of the flames. "Samuel," was all Eamon said in response. Benjen tutted softly, "A good lad. Very eager." Eamon turned to give Benjen a wan smile, "Much like you." They shared a small smile. Eventually, once he was warm, Eamon turned away from the fire and bustled over to his bed and sat down gently on it. Benjen followed behind him and settled on the chair by the desk. "Have you heard from John?" Eamon shook his head and watched as Benjen's eyes dimmed slightly. "I did not think you would have. But I hoped. As do I. Every day." They shared another smile and settled into a companionable silence for a few moments. "So why did you want to speak to me, Eamon?" "I received word from House Valerian," Eamon murmured as he pulled the scroll out of his cloak pocket and grasped it in his hands. "You are worried that they have said no?" Benjen remarked. Eamon smiled at him. "I sometimes forget how perceptive you are, Benjen Stark. I do you a disservice." Benjen barked out a laugh. "I do not take offense. You best open that scroll though. The answer will not change no matter how long you hold it." Eamon sighed but nodded. His eye slid down to the scroll in his hands. Its edges were frayed from where he had been grasping and regrasping it throughout the day, and the seahorse sigil of House Valerian was slightly smudged. He inhaled deeply before he broke the crest and unfurled the scroll. "To Aemon Targaryen. The old, the true, the brave. Montfort Valerian. Lord of the Tides." He felt all the stress leave his body in a heartbeat and he crumped in on himself. "Eamon. What is wrong?" Benjen's panicked voice came close by. He opened his eyes. He had not even realized he had closed them and gazed at the worried face of his friend. Benjen was kneeling in front of him, having left his chair, eyes wide and terror on his face. "They understood. They have declared for John," he murmured, still shocked that he had been so right. He had hoped. And he had thought they would do it. But he had not been sure. It had been a gamble. A small gamble, but a gamble, nonetheless. It gave him hope. "You are sure? Can I read it?" Eamon handed the scroll over to him. Benjen's eyes skimmed down the note quickly, his eyebrow raised, and his mouth moved as he read the lines to himself. "I do not understand," he said eventually. Eamon smiled at him and plucked the note back. He held it in front of Benjen and moved his hand across the parchment as he spoke. "I signed my letter as Maester Eamon. They have written to me as Aemon Targaryen. The first clue. They corrected my mistake in forgetting their house words without comment." He included the title of Master of Tides. "The first time that House Valerian were called that, was by my ancestor Aegon Targaryen. I did not refer to Montfort Valerian as such in my letter. They have declared." Benjen gazed up at him as Eamon spoke, widening as Eamon explained more and more of the note. "You are sure?" Benjen breathed out as a smile spread across his face. "Yes." Interlude, 298 AC. Aemon Targaryen, flashback. "These are the letters my father wrote to you?" Jon asked softly, his fingers sliding across the backs of the scrolls where the broken wax seal of House Targaryen lay. "Yes. All bar the first few, which I have misplaced. I will look for them later," Eamon replied, eyes fixed on Jon. Jon nodded. There was a momentary pause whilst he chewed his lip, and then he raised his eyes to Eamon and said, "Would you read them to me?" "Of course." Jon leaned over the gap separating him by the desk from Eamon on the bed and handed the stack of letters to Eamon. "Is there something in particular you would like to read about?" Eamon asked as he fiddled with the letters. At Jon's puzzled look he smiled at his nephew. "We exchanged letters for years on all manner of topics. We wrote about politics, about marriage alliances, about dragons, about the dance, about his children. We wrote about anything and everything." "Did he write about his life? What he was doing? How he spent his days?" "Did he write of my brother and sister in the same letter where he wrote of his life?" "Of course," he replied, shuffling the letters slightly to reach the one he himself had read many times before. He opened it and, once Jon had nodded, he turned his attention back to the letter and began to read. dearest uncle. It gladdens me to hear you are still well. Things are much the same here. I have just returned from Summer Hall. I was away for a moon in all. There is something there that keeps drawing me to it. I cannot explain the feeling, but it is as though there is something within the ruins that calls out for me. That is not right. It calls for me, but it does not call out for me. It calls for one of my blood. My wife thinks I am crazy, and mayhaps she is right. But there is something within the ruins is destined for House Targaryen. I can feel it. Try as I might, I cannot find what calls. It eludes me, like smoke or mist. When I think I am close and I have only one more stone to turn over, I turn over that stone to find only disappointment and nothing there. You will know of what I speak, for we have spoken of it often. It gives me hope that in the future a child of mine, or even my brother, might make our house great again. My daughter grows strong. I hope that one day you can meet her or share letters with her as you have with me. I did not have an egg to give her for her crib, but I have gifted her a kitten named Balerion in the hopes that he will watch over her as his namesake did for her ancestors. My father is disappointed in her, that she does not have the Targaryen look. My mother adores her and does not care. As for me, I am proud. I hope that if she looks like her mother, then she also inherits her mother's strength of character and grace. She is everything to me. I could not be happier or prouder. I still worry for Elia. Her health is frail, and whilst many consider it her duty to birth me more heirs, I do not wish for that. I would name Rhaenys my heir and be done with it. But I have taken your counsel and spoken to Elia of my concerns. She will not hear them. She says she will birth me a son and then we can talk. What more can I do, uncle? I cannot lose her. She is my closest friend. I know that I have already asked several times. But will you not reconsider my offer to leave the war? You grow older, uncle, and I would have your counsel in person. You are wasted on the war. It would be no disgrace, you have served your time and done your duty. Please do reconsider. Your nephew, Rhaegar. Aemon fell silent after he read the letter. He did not wish for Aegon. Jon said, after a long silence. He wished for a son more than anything. But he loved Elia. He may not have loved her like Lord Stark loves Lady Catelyn, but he loved her. He wrote of her often, her wit, her grace, her intelligence. He said many considered her weak and that in body, she was. But he was awed by her inner strength and determination. She provided him with great counsel, and he cherished her. He did not wish to lose her in the birthing bed. She struggled to bring your sister into the world and was in bed half a year afterwards, Aemon replied gently. He sighed and reached out to place a hand gently on top of Jon's as he continued, I will show you the other letters one day. But she would not listen to him. She was determined to do her duty, to not fail him. And she did not. She provided him with a son, your brother, and it nearly killed her. Do you think that is why he took my mother? Aemon released Jon's hand. We cannot know what happened between your mother and Rhaegar. But if you could guess. From all that Benjen has told me, your sister was a great deal like Elia. She was strong and stubborn, but she was also kind and caring with a quick wit. I would not find it hard to believe that they were in love and made a foolish and costly mistake, Aemon said, eyes fixed on Jon. He shifted in his seat and then continued, but I also know from the letters I shared with your father, that your father became more and more taken by prophecy and his letters began to make less and less sense. So, it is possible that in a moment of madness he did the unforgivable. Jon sighed and nodded to himself, I suppose I will never know. Perhaps not. But that does not matter. You heard what Benjen said to you, your mother's last words were to protect you. She told Ned Stark to protect you. She loved you. That is all that matters. Jon smiled at Aemon, his eyes wet. There was a brief pause whilst he wiped his hand across his face to remove his tears. Aemon carefully looked away. He offered to pardon you from your duties to the war. Jon said eventually. Aemon sighed. Yes. And he was right, I had long been unable to fulfill all the tasks required of me. But I made an oath. And, at that stage, I did not believe I was needed in King's Landing. I was an old man with nothing to offer but advice, and I could do that in letters. I was too proud to accept his offer and too embarrassed to admit that I was replaceable here. I am glad you did not accept his offer, Jon said after another long pause. Before Aemon could react, his nephew pressed on. If you had, you would have been killed along with my father, my brother, and my sister. You would not have been spared and there would have been no one to tell me who I was. I would have stayed here. I would never have hatched the dragon, and I would have died here. Aemon turned away from Jon, his own eyes slightly wet. He cast around hastily for another topic to discuss. Why did he spend so much time at Summerhall? Aemon turned back to his nephew and smiled sadly at him. He was born there. Jon's eyes widened. But it is a ruin. It was not then. Will you tell me about it? Aemon shifted slightly against the pillows on his bed to get more comfortable. Next to him, the dragon snuffled quietly and moved into a smaller ball. He smiled gently at her, resisting the urge to run his hands down her scales. You know where the heir to the Iron Throne lived, of course. Aemon began, and when Jon nodded, he pressed on. Summerhall was where the second son should have lived and where we spent our summers. My grandfather, Daeron, built it. He did it to honor the Dornish ahead of my mother's marriage to my father. Although it was built in the Stormlands, it is so far south that much of the land around it is marshes, the Dornish marshes. It was magnificent. It sprawled so far and yet reached so high. The great hall was stunning with thin stained glass windows that cast beautiful colors all over the floor. The courtyard inside the castle was built like a Dornish one, full of water features and beautiful paths lined with orange and lemon trees. It was large and yet it had none of the emptiness that plagued the Red Keep. I spent much time there as a child as my grandfather gifted Summerhall to my father. It was home. Was your father not the fourth son? Yes. But his heir had Dragonstone and his next two sons preferred King's Landing. So, he gifted Summerhall to my father, Aemon responded. Were you born there? Nearly. My mother wished for me to be. It was as close to Dorne as she could be, but I was born in King's Landing in the end. But I spent more time in Summerhall than I did in King's Landing. Egg and I would chase each other through the gardens, or I would chase him as he toddled around. I would read on the benches by the fountains. I would stroll around the outside of the castle and watch the sunlight as it caught on the windows. What happened to it? Aemon sighed. My brother. I do not know exactly what he did, but from what your father wrote to me and from what I have heard by men who joined the Watch since, I have been able to piece enough together to guess. My brother was obsessed with dragons. When we were boys, we used to pretend that we were dragon riders of old. But I grew out of it. Egg did not. He was always convinced that dragons would return to Westeros. I believe that he thought that if he could bring them back himself it would strengthen House Targaryen. It was a child's dream in the mind of a king. When Rhaella, your grandmother, was pregnant, he demanded that House Targaryen gather at Summerhall to celebrate the impending birth of his first great-grandchild. He gathered all the eggs he could, 7 in total, and took them to Summerhall. He tried to hatch them, to welcome the birth of a new generation of House Targaryen. How? Jon whispered, eyes wide. Wildfire. Why? Why then? Or why did he do it? Both. I do not know why he chose that time. I can only think that his advisors were finally unable to stop him or convince him otherwise, and that he thought that the impending birth of your father was a good opportunity to see through his plan. Why did he do it? Because he was obsessed. From the moment he could speak until the moment he died, his mind was consumed with the idea of dragons. Jon gave Aemon a long, commiserating look before he murmured, and he died because of it. Yes. He died. His firstborn son died. His best friend died. The eggs lost in the depths of the castle. Many injured. And your grandmother, Rhaella, went into premature labor with your father. Your father was born the night my brother died. Jon heaved out a deep breath and gazed at Aemon in horror. He was born that night. Aemon nodded and said softly, to be born under such circumstances, it had a profound effect on him. He felt so much kinship with the place, and yet he hated the memories there. He would visit there often and sleep by himself in the ruins and leave his guards outside. He would search for weeks at a time for the dragon eggs, but as you heard in the letter, he could never find them. Summerhall cursed him and consumed him. Jon was silent for a long time, his eyes sad and wet. Eventually he heaved in a deep breath and said, "Do you think the eggs are still there?" "Yes." John turned his eyes to the ceiling as though lost in thought. Then he abruptly turned to face Eamon, his eyes wide and hopeful, and said, "If my father could feel them, but not find them, then I do not think they will hatch for me. It is like you and my dragon, but maybe one day, they will hatch for my descendants." "Do you think that is possible, uncle?" "Yes." "Then, once my dragon is strong enough to look after herself, I will find them. For our family and for her. So, she is not alone." Chapter 7, Duty. Chapter Text. Chapter Summary. Varys reflects on the events that led him to forcing Ned Stark's hand. Ned Stark talks to Sansa and watches as she strikes up an unlikely friendship. Jon makes it to Moat Cailin. In our interlude, we learn more about Egg. Notes: the scenes with Varys and Ned are happening at the same time. The scene with Jon is a moon later. 298 AC. Varys. His little birds were excellent, he had trained them well. Not so well that they could ever do the job without him, but well enough that they were an asset to his cause. But there were some things it was better for him to do and to see for himself. His little birds were young, which meant they sometimes missed the nuance in words or understood that what wasn't said was just as important as what was said. So, today, he was a stout man, Duncan, shrouded in a heavy cloak as he walked slowly through Flea Bottom towards the tavern he often frequented when dressed as he was today. He needed time to think and time to plan. He could not do that in the Red Keep, where even if Littlefinger was not watching him, someone was bound to be. He could never truly relax as Lord Varys, but he could as Duncan. No one cared about Duncan. He kept his head down as he walked towards his destination, but his ears open. He picked up snippets of conversation as he walked, but maintained his onward trajectory. He did not want anyone to think he was listening. He schooled Duncan's face into the usual slightly grumpy but not aggressive look. The man always wore one which stopped people bothering him, but one did not suggest danger. "Hand, gone, household, vanished," one voice said. "King, doesn't, fuck," said another. "Toib Homart, packing. Food, none." As Varys reached his destination, he filed away the third snippet of conversation he had caught for later before he pushed open the heavy door. He let the door slam shut behind him, as was the custom in Flea Bottom. Manners were, after all, not a priority here, and headed straight towards the table he always took in the corner. It was early morning, as it always was when he came here, and so the tavern was empty apart from the staff. He eased himself into the corner booth and settled down. A mug of water and bowl of porridge was dropped in front of him several minutes later. He thanked the serving girl and pressed 2 silver stags into her palm. Nearly 5 times what the meager offering was worth, but he was not paying for them. He was paying for the privilege of being left alone and unbothered whilst he thought. He had been coming to this tavern for years, since his first moon in Westeros all those years ago when Aes had been king. He would come once a week, sit at the same table, not drink, or eat, and just think. Then when the sun reached the halfway point in the sky he would leave. He knew that they thought him strange, but he paid them well and they did not bother him. And, more importantly, they did not let other patrons bother him. So, he kept coming back. He shuffled slightly in his seat and hid a grimace. The seating had not changed in over 20 years and was in dire need of an upgrade. The wooden bench was full of splinters. The door opened as another patron left and a cold breeze whipped around the room. He wrapped his hands around his bowl of warm porridge and, once the door was shut, resumed his prior position. He turned his mind to Ned Stark, the main reason he was here today. He had stopped his little birds investigating the man when it became clear that something was very wrong. Men like Ned Stark did not go around burning their letters for no reason. More specifically, they did not burn letters that seemed completely innocent. His little birds were thorough in their work. They knew to distract Pycelle before the man could open any ravens, and to hold the scrolls up to the light to try and ascertain if there was anything of value in the contents. Shorter scrolls were always the most valuable. The fewer words, the more important the contents. If there was anything they thought he may wish to see, they would bring the scrolls to Varys, who would ease them open, breaking the wax seal, and read them. Then Varys would write the words again on new parchment, in the same hand that the original had been written in, and carefully reseal it with the array of house seals he had gathered over the years. He would commit the words on the original to memory, then burn the original whilst his little birds returned the new scrolls to Pycelle's chambers and alerted the other little birds and sometimes Hawes that Pycelle could return about his duties. It was a consuming, stressful, and tiring process. He often only had minutes at a time. But it was invaluable. It was through this process that Varys had learned long ago how to tell a forged scroll and seal from another. After all, who better to spot a fake than a man who spent so much time writing them himself? And so, Varys had known the contents of Jon Snow's letter to Ned Stark. And he had a little bird, Albert, the same one who brought him the scroll, stationed between the walls, in a hidden area of Ned Stark's solar to watch the man's reaction to the letter. It was, he could admit, a pitiful attempt to try and understand why the words were so important that a bastard would write to the father who had dumped him at the wall. But Varys had limited options, for it was not as though he could ask Ned Stark what was going on. So, spying it was. The problem he was then faced with was that he did not know what it meant, because Ned Stark's reaction, other than burning the letter immediately, had been muted according to Albert, who was, undoubtedly, Varys' most reliable little bird. Ned Stark had burned the letter on sight and there stared for ages at the flames. Then he had sent his daughter away from King's Landing. Strange but muted. However, what Varys did know was that it was clearly important if it had resulted in Ned Stark burning the letter on sight. He had been right in having Ned Stark's incoming ravens monitored and in having his little bird watch the man. As soon as he knew that Ned Stark was in over his head, because even if the man had burned the letter, he was still woefully inadequate at politics, the first thing he had done was to write to Wyman Marndale, under the guise of Ned Stark, requesting that a ship remain in King's Landing at all times. Clearly, whatever Ned Stark was trying to hide was important enough to burn a scroll for, and so the man needed an escape route. Varys knew that Ned Stark did not have the presence of mind to have an exit plan. Luckily for him, Varys did. Ned Stark was a good man, a better than King's Landing deserved. He should not die here, and he would if he had carried on the way he was. So, Varys had acted quickly. Then, Varys had watched Ned Stark for a moon. To anyone other than Varys, except, perhaps, Littlefinger, everything was the same as it had been. The man did his duty, he advised his king, he spoke to his daughter, he conversed with his men. But there was a tightness to Ned Stark's movement, almost a hesitation, that made Varys nervous. He did not relax even when his youngest daughter returned to the north. If anything, he became tenser. The most honorable man in Westeros. All men have secrets, Illyrio. No man is truly as honorable as they claim. Ned Stark's secret had always been as clear as day and night: Jon Snow's mother. And Varys had never cared before who she was. What did he care for the one stain on Ned Stark's honor? Yet, she was clearly someone important and worth protecting, and protecting the boy, for if Ned Stark was burning scrolls. Who was she? A living sigil for both my father's house and my mother's. He had spent a moon watching Ned Stark, and he had spent a moon trying to puzzle out who Jon Snow's mother could be. A living sigil. His only clue. The direwolf that all Stark children were said to have clearly represented House Stark, Ned Stark, but what other house had a living sigil? He had gone through the houses in Westeros and the beasts and creatures that made up the banners of all the known houses. Living. He had gone through them all. It was a time-consuming process, and he had had to be discreet, lest Cersei think he was onto her deception, which meant it took even longer for him to find the information he needed. He had gone through the most obvious, including Lannister, Arryn, Aemon, Baratheon and Celtigar. He had even stooped to the lengths of checking House Ambrose and House Stokeworth, as though anyone would be proud of an ant or a sheep for a living sigil. Because it had been pride, Lord Stark might not have understood the tone of the letter, but Varys did. Jon Snow had not written to his father to update him on his life, but to boast, as all children did. So, the living sigil had to be something of value. Clearly not a sheep, but he had checked all the same. Varys was nothing if not diligent. But, the dates and the ages of women of those houses that had powerful living sigils had never aligned enough to be viable options. On the few times it had been possible at a stretch, the sheer impossibility of the woman of that house being pregnant, Varys not knowing, or Ned Stark managing to impregnate said woman when he was halfway across Westeros, when the seed would have needed to be planted to coincide with the age of Jon Snow, put a stop to his research. His little birds would have known. He would have known. Then, when they had yielded no results, He had gone to extreme lengths. He had even considered flora and fauna. House Tyrell had yielded no results. Likewise, House Smallwood. He was back at square one. There was never a vow that Ned Stark did not honor. He had been in the great hall of the Red Keep, watching Myrcella, when he had realized who Jon Snow's mother was. "They are so like our queen, do they not?" Littlefinger whispered in Varys' ear. Varys did not turn to acknowledge Littlefinger but instead inclined his head and said, "Except Myrcella. She has her mother's looks, but her bearing is all her father." He had meant it to be a slight dig at Jaime Lannister, for Myrcella was so much like her father, intelligent, courageous and with an iron will that he sometimes wondered how anyone could believe the girl had come from Robert's seed. Myrcella was Sir Jaime in both image and spirit. Carefully hidden by Cersei given their similar shared looks on surface level which, of course, mirrored Sir Jaime's. But to anyone who knew Sir Jaime, Myrcella was all him in bearing and looks. There was nothing of Cersei in her. So, as he had watched Myrcella argue good-naturedly with Sansa Stark who looked so much like her mother and nothing like Ned Stark, it was as though the veil was lifted. Jon Snow didn't have his father's looks despite what all the reports from the north had said. He had Stark looks. Clearly not Benjen Stark's son. Benjen had never left the north. Not Brandon's son. Brandon had never left the north before his death and the dates did not line up for when he had ridden south. Not Rickard's son. The man would never have fathered a bastard. He was not Ned Stark's son. There was only one option. Lyanna's son. Rhaegar's son. He had made up an excuse to Littlefinger about needing to speak to an informant and left the Great Hall. That had been 3 days before he had received the news of Daenerys Targaryen's pregnancy. He shuffled in his seat slightly wincing as a splinter from wooden bench dug into him. Then he waved down a serving girl. She removed the untouched bowl of porridge and returned a few minutes later with a bowl of stew, possibly rat stew judging by the fur on the meat within, then vanished again. He resisted the temptation to push the bowl away and instead settled back in his chair. His mind turned back to Ned Stark. He had dithered, which was unlike him, for days over whether to be frank with Ned Stark. Ultimately, he had decided not to be. The man was a risk. A liability. One that Varys needed away from King's Landing at all costs. The fact that Ned Stark had so willingly taken up Varys' suggestion that he leave King's Landing told Varys that his suspicions were correct. Ned Stark would not neglect his duty or turn away from his king, his friend, for anything other than family. Jon Snow was not Ned Stark's son. He was the son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen. Which, as far as Ned Stark's honor was concerned, meant that Daenerys and Viserys were kin too. Which explained his behavior that day when Robert had requested assassins go after Viserys and Daenerys. What to do now? His plan had always been a Targaryen restoration. If not Viserys, who Illyrio said was deeply troubled, then Daenerys, who would be matched to the right man after the ultimately pre-planned death of Khal Drogo. But this changed things. Which Targaryen was he to support? The Targaryens with a Dothraki Khalasar of 100,000 because, make no mistake, they would cross the narrow sea one day for the right Khal, and from all Varys had heard in the last few moons, Daenerys Targaryen was shaping up to be a force of nature. If ever a woman could lead a Khalasar, it would be her. Or should Varys support the bastard son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen who, if the boy's letter was to be believed, had a baby dragon? If children did, after all, lie. That all said, Ned Stark had only ever told one lie in his life, although it was the most honorable, foolish lie. Having met Sansa Stark and Arya Stark, Varys could well believe that all Stark children had been raised with the same honor that flooded Ned Stark's veins. Starks did not lie. Not to boast. Not to be prideful. If a Stark lied, it was for the right reasons. And the boy had nothing to gain by lying to his father. Or did he support both? Could he support both? Daenerys matched to a Lord Paramount's son, Viserys to a Lord Paramount's daughter, and Jon Snow matched to another daughter. They could secure 4 great houses, including House Stark through Jon Snow if Varys played his cards right. Then when Jon Snow had a son and Viserys, or Daenerys, had a daughter, they could be matched. Reuniting the 2 claims. Risky, but possible. Or did he wait and watch? Decide who would be better for the people? Who would do the most good for the realm? He shuffled slightly and let out the smallest sigh. His duty was not to house Targaryen, although he longed for the Targaryen restoration. It had been him after all who had counseled Aerys not to open the gates to Tywin Lannister. His duty was not to house Lannister. His duty was to the people. Always to the people. Varys rose, pushed another silver stag into the serving girl's hand as he walked past her. She had a young babe upstairs and she was looking much too thin, and left the tavern, once again letting the door slam behind him. As he walked through the streets of Flea Bottom and headed back towards the Red Keep, his mind turned to what next. He would stay for the people and watch, and wait, and bide his time. He had already helped both Daenerys and Viserys and Jon Snow. He would help both sides more, he would watch both, and hope that one came through for the people in the end. Robert Baratheon would be dead soon. Too many people were beginning to question the paternity of the children, and so Cersei would have to act. As he turned away from Flea Bottom and his path took him closer to the Red Keep and the smell from Flea Bottom faded behind him, his decision was made: he would stay. The people of Flea Bottom needed him more than the Targaryen children did. For now, the children were as safe as they could be. The irony that Duncan had just spent the last 3 hours mulling over how to best support a Targaryen restoration, if that was what was best for the realm, was not lost on him. Now all he had to do was find Jon Snow, because there was no way that the boy was still at the wall. Not if he knew who his mother was. 298 AC Ned Stark. I do not understand, Father Sansa said for what felt like the 100th time that morning. Her eyes were wet and her voice pleading, verging on petulant, as she stared at him with big blue eyes. She looked as exhausted as he felt, only, unlike him, the huge dark lines under her eyes were tear-streaked. She had clearly been crying on and off all night. He had slept badly on the ship too, if he had slept at all. His eyes felt like weights had been attached to them and his patience was wearing thin. It was like a great cloud had settled over him. The household had not asked him what was going on yet, and he had not offered to speak to them. He knew that they understood. He would not have dragged them away so quickly, not even giving them time to pack, if it had not been urgent. He would talk to them soon. He had so much explaining to do, to everyone. Once he had spoken to Sansa. What have I done? Ned hid a sigh and instead beckoned her away from the Winterfell household and Marndaily men and towards the bow of the ship. She followed him in silence. They were as far as they could reasonably be. He braced his hands on the rails and waited for her to speak. Why did you take me away? Sansa said softly, the tears of that morning giving way to an expression that spoke of loathing. I was to marry Joffrey. I was to get everything I had ever wanted. Did you truly wish to stay there? With the people who had Lady killed? With the people who had a child killed? You do remember what they did to Mika, don't you, Sansa? He said sadly, wondering just how much damage he had done to his daughter in neglecting her upbringing so much that she would rather stay with the Lannisters than go home. Arya is the reason Lady is dead. That the butcher's boy is dead, Sansa replied bitterly, eyes filling with tears. I hate her. She ruined everything. He turned, his hands whipped out to grasp Sansa's shoulders. He gave her a firm shake. No. Lady is dead because Joffrey wanted her dead. Mika is dead because Joffrey wanted him dead. He was a child, Sansa. He was the same age as you. Tell me, if it was Robb or Bran, would you care more? Is it the fact he was only the butcher's boy that means you do not care? Sansa stared at him, eyes wide, and did not respond. He sighed. So that is it. You do not care that Mika is dead because he was only the son of a butcher, he murmured, eyes fixed on hers. His hands were frozen on her shoulders. Abruptly he took a step back and released her shoulders. She stumbled slightly but righted herself quickly, her eyes still fixed on him. I have never been so disappointed in you, Sansa. I thought you had been raised to value all life, not just the life of the lords and ladies of the realm. Mika was a child. He was innocent. He did nothing wrong, and even if he had, he did not deserve to die. No one deserves to die like that. They hunted him down and they butchered him like a dog. Tell me, Sansa, at what age does someone deserve to die for being in the wrong place at the wrong time? 13 is clearly old enough by your standards. What about 10, Arya's age? What about 4, Rickon's age? What about an unborn babe? Or do you support the killing of them if your prince and the king wishes it? As he watched, Sangza's eyes filled with tears, but she did not move or reply. Lady is dead because Joffrey wanted her dead. Mika is dead because Joffrey wanted him dead. I do not know how many times this must be said to you before it takes root, Sangza. Joffrey could turn around tomorrow and ask for your head, and you would likely be dead, he continued angrily, eyes fixed on his daughter. There is a babe across the narrow sea not yet born who the king has sent assassins after. It's crime. Its grandfather was the Mad King. Tell me, Sangza, does that child deserve death before it has even had a chance at life? She did not reply. Her face turning white and her eyes wide and terrified. Do I deserve death, Sangza? For refusing to be party to the murder of an unborn babe? For not wanting to serve a man or his child who would advocate for the murder of that babe? Can you at least answer me that? She shook her head vigorously, her hair now falling out of the careful southern style flying about and tears streaming down her face. That is why we have left King's Landing. That is why you will not marry Joffrey. I refuse to have you married to a child who would support the murder of an unborn babe. No, do not look at me like that, Sangza. Joffrey had Lady killed when she did nothing wrong. He had Mika killed when he did nothing wrong. He would have had your sister killed if he could. That boy is rotten. He would have the unborn Targaryen babe killed in a heartbeat, much like Robert will if he felt it would strengthen his reign. Do you really wish to be married to a man who would do that? Sangza did not say anything, her eyes were wide, and tears were flowing freely down her face. She looked more like a child than she had in years. Do you want to be married to a man who would kill a babe for existing? A man who would turn on you in an instant and beat you simply because you gave him a daughter instead of a son? Because that is what Joffrey would do, Sangza. He does not value anything but power. He does not care for you. He likely does not even like you. You mean nothing to him, he said softly. Mika is dead because Joffrey is cruel and rotten. Lady is dead because Joffrey is cruel and rotten. He takes after his father and, Robert is cruel too. Every man in that wretched city is cruel. I will not stay or countenance you staying in a place where the murder of an unborn babe is cause for celebration. Sangza wrapped her arms around her body, as though trying to hold herself together, and stared in horror at him. He sighed. Go. Speak to your Septa. Seek her counsel, the gods know you listen to her more than you have ever listened to me. ****. He spent the next week trapped at sea, watching Sangza. She did not speak to the Septa after she left Ned, instead she wandered below deck and did not appear for several hours. His guards reported she had locked herself in the room that had been allocated to her and Jane and was in hysterics, crying and screaming. He nearly broke and tried to talk to her, wondering whether he had been unnecessarily harsh on her. But one look at her angry face that night, when she emerged for the evening meal, stopped him. If he apologized, she would learn nothing. She had to learn that the life was not nice and not like the stories the Septa would tell her. The world was cruel, and it was harsh, and she had to learn it sooner rather than later, or she would bring destruction down on everything she touched with her foolish naivety. The next morning, Ned watched his daughter carefully. Jane was staying away from her, keeping close to her father with a terrified expression on her face, no doubt still worried about their flight from King's Landing, and so Sansa had no choice but to seek out the company of the only other person close to her age on the ship, for no one else would talk to the girl. She had, Ned realized, isolated everyone else in some way or another over the course of the last few moons. Ned watched her as she carefully sat next to Gendry on deck, her bowl of porridge resting on her lap, and struck up a tentative conversation with him. Even from a distance, Ned could tell the conversation was painful and awkward. Gendry looked particularly out of place with a light blush and shy smile spread over his cheeks. Silence descended between them quickly, with both looking uncomfortable and painfully young. He watched as Sansa's eyes flicked over Gendry's dark hair and bright blue eyes. Perhaps, there was hope for his eldest daughter. She was not a fool. Naive but not a fool. Then when they had their midday meal, bread and dried meats, Sansa headed resolutely back over to Gendry with a civasse set under her arm. She sat down next to him, pulled the game between the two and carefully began explaining the rules to him. He smiled to himself. Sansa was nothing if not determined, just like her mother. He watched carefully as Gendry hastily tried to leave and make excuses several times before the boy bowed his head and clearly admitted defeat. The conversation was still awkward, but it was conversation. Progress. That night, he watched as Sangza brought a book out from below deck and settled down next to Gendry to read. They did not speak except a few words, but the boy looked more relaxed than he had since Ned had taken him from King's Landing. His posture was less stiff and his eyes less firm. He looked more and more like the Robert that Ned remembered, with each passing minute carefree, young and handsome. It nearly broke Ned's heart. This was a boy that could have been king, should have been king if he had not been born on the wrong side of the sheets. And yet, the fact he had been meant that Ned would never have to pick between Robert's heir and Jon. He would always pick Jon. Always. But the knowledge he did not have to turn his back on Robert's son made him think that, perhaps, the old gods had heard his prayers. The next few days followed a similar pattern. Sangza broke her fast with Gendry each morning. During the day she would teach him Sivas and trounce the poor boy, and in the evening, following what was a timid request by Gendry, would spend her time teaching him his letters. The strange duo did not speak to anyone else and seemed completely content in each other's company. Ned smiled. This was the daughter he wanted Sangza to be, someone who did not care about the manner of someone's birth and who saw them for them. He just wished it hadn't taken her complete isolation for this to happen. But, maybe, now that it had, she would be better. She would become a Stark and care less about what people thought of her and change her views of others. Even if she did not, it was, at least, progress. Sangza did not speak to or look at Ned for several days, and so, when she came to him on the 8th day of their voyage, he was surprised. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she looked so young and frail, far worse than she had done the few previous days. Her arms were wrapped around her, and her eyes were gazing at him in terror and hope. He wanted nothing more than to take her into his arms and tell her it would all be fine. That he was not truly angry at her. But she needed to understand that life was not a story, it was cruel and harsh, and that her actions had consequences. Gendry said that the people of Flea Bottom hate the king. They hate Joffrey. They hate Cersei, she began, her eyes fixed on his, pleading. Did he say why? They starve whilst the king feasts. They live in squalor with shit, her face curled in a disgusted fashion, running through the streets. They cannot make an honest living. He said most of them hate the lords and ladies of Westeros. They hate us. He did not leave anything out then. Sangza flinched as though her worst fears had been confirmed. Why? Why do they hate us? Because it is a rare thing for a lord or lady to care about anyone other than themselves, Sangza. And, when they do, they often make foolish mistakes, for you cannot please both the lords and ladies, who give you power, and please the small folk. To try and do so is a fool's errand. Pleasing the two sides is impossible. And so, most who do wish to help do not, for fear of what will happen to them if they push too far. They put themselves, and their families first. There was a long pause, during which Sangza's eyes moved from him to the sea behind him. You do not rule like that in the north. I do not. Why? The north is different, Sangza. You know this. Remember how people spoke to you. How you spoke to them. Then think of what King's Landing was like. Northerners have always been different. We are stronger, we are more loyal, and we care little for the scheming of politics. We are not like the South. We need each other. She sighed quietly. The small folk of the South would hate me. He had decided in the days of silence that followed his harsh but fair words to Sangza that from now on he would be honest with his children. With his wife. Secrets and lies had caused this grief, and he would not bring more down on his family's head. Yes. There was another long silence, during which Sangza's eyes turned away from the sea and back to settle on his face. The babe. Will it die? She said softly, her eyes searching his face. I do not know. She nodded, her eyes sad. I am sorry, she said after a lengthy pause. He eyed her carefully. What for? Everything. For acting like a child. For blaming Arya when it was my fault that Lady died. I should have told the truth and I lied. For protecting Joffrey when it was him who was wrong. For not caring about Mika. I am so sorry, father, she blurted out, her words tumbling out in a rush even as tears began to slide down her face. He pulled her to him, his arms wrapping around her as he sunk to his knees and cradled her to his chest as he had not done since she had grown big enough to walk. It was not your fault that Lady died. And I am sorry, I should never have shouted at you, he murmured. She burrowed her face into his shoulder so tightly that he barely heard her when she said, I miss Lady. He pulled her closer, tightening his arms around her until he felt he might accidentally hurt her. I miss her too, he whispered in her ear. Sansa snuffled against him for a few moments before she said quietly, into his shoulder, do you think Arya will ever forgive me? Ned pulled back and held her at arm's length, of course. But why did you blame Arya? He asked softly. When Sansa did not reply he sighed and murmured, because you did not wish to see the bad in Joffrey, because your mother and I failed in teaching you. And because Arya is your sister. It is easier to blame her. Sansa did not reply, her eyes fixed on the floor. You cannot do that again, Sansa. She is your sister. You must protect her and support her as you would with Rickon or Brandon. Remember your mother's words, family, duty, honor. Family first. The lone wolf dies, but the pack survives. Remember that, Sansa. She nodded, her eyes rose to meet his still watery but a firmer resolve than he had ever seen before in them. I will say sorry to Arya, she said in a steely voice. Then her eyes moved away from his and she said quietly to the deck of the ship, do you think Nymeria is still alive? That wolf is just like her owner, fierce and stubborn. If there was one of that pack that could survive in the wilds by themselves, it would be Nymeria. Sansa smiled, her eyes still watery but less sad than they had been during their conversation, and made to step back. He gave her shoulders one last squeeze, then released her from his arms so she could rise. She rose, as did he, but she did not turn to head away. He waited patiently whilst she chewed on her bottom lip, clearly deep in thought. Gendry, she began, eyes fixed on his. He is the king's bastard. He nodded. She nodded even as her eyes darted around, he looks like him. More than Joffrey did. Then she smiled and said in a childish manner, he is nice. Is he coming to Winterfell with us? Yes. I saw you teaching him Sivas, he said gently, trying to keep the conversation going. Does he learn quickly? Sansa smiled, no. But he tries. He listens to me and asks questions. Ned nodded, suddenly understanding the strange friendship he had seen blossom between the bastard boy and his daughter. Clearly, what had been an attempt by a lonely and isolated child to reach out to the only other person who might befriend them had blossomed into the beginnings of a friendship. And, after well over 2 moons in King's Landing with the only person interested in her company, other than Jane Poole, who had always been a yes person, being Joffrey, who ignored anything she said, having someone pay attention to what she said and show a genuine interest had done Sansa good. There was a long pause, then Sansa said quietly, is my betrothal broken? I do not know. I did not officially end it. I would happily end it though. What do you wish for? I don't want to marry Joffrey. He is cruel and unkind, Sansa said carefully. Then she curled her lip, he had Lady killed. You are right, he would kill the Targaryen babe if he could. He nodded. Then when we are home, I will write to the king and say that we no longer wish for the betrothal. Thank you. 298 AC Jon Snow. It was nearly 2 moons after he left the wall that he saw Moat Cailin on the horizon. He had made good time through the mountains. The combination of ghost and winter, plus being on horseback and keeping to the very bottom of the mountains to avoid the clans, had meant that he found easy and well-trod trails and so was able to move at speed. He had scarcely seen another human except in the distance, and he had avoided them, and they had avoided him. He had not stayed in one place for more than a night, and he had slept in shifts with Ghost and Winter. He was exhausted, grumpy, and longed for a feather bed and a bath, but it had been worth it. He paused at the brow of the hill he was on. Twilight was closing in, and he didn't have time to waste, but he took a small moment to savor the knowledge that he had made it. Only another week of riding maximum the speed he was traveling, and he would be safely in the neck. His only worry now was how he would find Greywater Watch. He had grown up on stories of men vanishing in there. Moat Cailin does not need to be fully garrisoned, for the men of Greywater Watch will bleed any enemies that pass through the causeway. Only a fool would march his army through the causeway or try and find an alternative route through the neck. The men of the neck know pathways that are not visible to the naked eyes, and any weary traveling that does not stick to the path does not come out of the neck alive. Truly, House Reed are the greatest asset in our defense of the north should we ever need to defend ourselves. Overheard, Winter let out a screech as she swooped down. He smiled up at her. She had grown noticeably over the last 2 moons. Now the size of a small dog, her body was still tiny, but her wings were strong and muscular as were her back legs. If she crouched and then took off, she could propel herself above his head before she even needed to flap her wings. He was torn between wondering if it was just her and she was always destined to be strong and powerful, Eamon had said, after all, that all dragons were different, or if it was the nature of her first few months of life and the unlimited food and ability to stretch her wings that had allowed for such growth and strength. Her flames were increasing in strength and were a beautiful white shot through with red. She was able to protect herself now. The only problem he now faced was that he had to stay on the causeway as he headed to Greywater Water, given that the land either side was deeply treacherous, and so Winter would need to stay away, flying high overhead where she might be confused for a bird. She could only really land and take off at night. He would miss her. He shifted slightly in his saddle and then kicked his horse forward. By the time his horse crossed into the remains of Moat Cailin, night had nearly arrived. However, the light of the moon bathed the moat in a gentle white light. Enough to see by, but not enough to do much else. He would not light a fire lest he give away his position in the exposed castle ruins. After all, lone travelers made tempting targets. He nodded at Ghost, who trotted off to scout in one direction whilst John carefully dismounted his horse and then tied it up to a piece of jutting out timber before he headed off in the opposite direction. He withdrew Dark Sister as he walked. He would take no risks. Not here. Not when he was so close. He could feel Winter circling high above him in the darkness. He had trained with Dark Sister every morning and evening since the day he had encountered the wildlings, in the hope that, next time he encountered enemies, he would be more skilled. His foot caught on a stray piece of rubble and he rightened himself quickly as he began to fall. There was another clatter nearby, much like a dagger or similar being dropped. He paused. "Who goes there?" he called out, eyes scanning the darkness. "We mean no harm." A man's voice called out. "Come out of the darkness slowly. Show yourself." John called back. He paused as he felt a gentle nudge in his back and then relaxed slightly. He kept his eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. From behind a partially collapsed timber frame that, given its sheer size, clearly led to what had once been the Great Hall, a group of men appeared. John tightened his grip on Dark Sister as he watched them carefully. They had their arms raised, and although they were heavily armed and could have easily outpowered him, they made no move to the weapons that were strapped to his side. They all had smaller daggers strapped to their sides and long bows over their backs. No long swords in sight. They were shorter than John and thin. There was no bulk muscle on them like Rob or even, at a stretch, John had. They were underwhelmingly average. Easy to overlook. If he had not heard something fall, he doubted he would have spotted them, for they blended in so well to the dark surrounding in their dark green and black cloaks that they seemed to bleed out of the darkness. They moved with a lithe grace that suggested they could move fast and quickly when necessary. If they had carried swords, John imagined that their fighting style would much mirror his own. The man at the front, the smallest and thinnest of all, had a 3-pronged spear strapped to his back and a small dagger to his side. He stared at John as though surprised. His eyes slid to Ghost and then into the sky where John knew Winter waited. The man only slid his eyes away from the sky when he got within a foot of John. They were so close that John could see the veins under the man's skin. The man smiled gently at him. "It is good to see you again, Jon Snow," the man said in a soft voice. Ghost nudged Jon's thigh with his snout. Jon felt himself relax, for if Ghost was not worried then he did not need to be, and smiled back. "Lord Howland Reed." "You do know," the man said softly, his eyes flitting back to the sky. He took a step back and said, "She is magnificent. You can tell her to come down. My men and I will never harm her." There was a momentary pause and then Jon nodded. He felt around inside for the light tether that connected him to Winter, one that had been growing from strength to strength since her birth 3 moons ago, and gave it a reassuring nudge. A squawk sounded above. Then he felt the flutter of displaced air and she swung down to earth. She landed on Ghost's back with a light thump as she always did and turned her white eyes on Howland Reed. Jon watched as Winter stared at his father's closest friend and the man stared back. They did not break eye contact for several moments. Then Winter let out a shrill sound he had never heard from her before, like a bird twittering, and then curled up in a ball on Ghost's neck. John sheathed his sword. Decision made. My uncle Benjen speaks highly of you, Lord Reed. I did not think to see you here, he said after several more moments of silence passed by and the Crannock men made no indication they would stop staring at Winter. It was another minute or so before Lord Reed turned to look at him with light brown eyes. The man gave him another soft smile and said, as I would of every Stark I have ever met. You need help, that is why you traveled south. Once we are safely in the Neck, I will tell you of how we came to be so far north. John nodded. Shall we camp here tonight and then head off at first light? Lord Reed shook his head. If you can press on, that would be better. Things are moving in the north and the south. The sooner we get back to the Neck, the safer we will be. We should not linger here. I will eat in my saddle, John replied. Then he smiled at the other men who he had still not greeted. Do you all have horses? We have no use for horses in the Neck. Do not worry, we can keep up, Lord Reed said in such a soft voice that John realized that it wasn't that Lord Reed spoke softly to him. His voice was soft, soothing and gentle. Safe. Come. Let us depart. Keep your dragon in the air until we reach the Neck. It is not safe for her to land. Until you 298 AC Aemon Targaryen, flashback. What was my great-great-grandfather like, uncle? John said softly from his position in front of the fire. He looked impossibly young that evening. The flickering of the flames brought out the still youthful chubbiness to his cheeks. John was not fat, far from it, but there was always something youthful in a child's face, a layer of fat that every child who had not been starved had that made them look young. John would grow out of it soon, for it would not be long before his nephew truly became a man. He looked so like Egg in that moment, on the cusp of being a man. Ready to be a man. But not ready. It was almost as though he had gone back in time and was looking at Egg 75 years before. John was only a few years younger than Egg had been when they had sat by a similar fire all those years before, and Aemon had told him that he was leaving King's Landing for good. God's Egg had cried. He had never seen his brother look so young and so weak in that moment. And John, gazing at him with his grey and almond eyes, with a worried expression on his face, looked so like his brother it hurt. Aemon shifted on the bed, pulling the covers up a bit higher as though for protection. His eyes found John's and his nephew gave him a sad smile. I did not mean to upset you, uncle. You did not, Aemon replied gently, a soft smile on his lips. The downside of living as long as I have, nephew, is that I see ghosts wherever I am. Sometimes I look at you, and I see my mother. Sometimes I see Arian. Sometimes I see Egg. Sometimes I even see myself. I'm looking at you right now, and I am reminded so much of Egg. John did not say anything, but his eyes turned downwards in contemplation. He was a lot like you, both in appearance and in personality, Aemon eventually continued after several minutes of silence had passed. His eyes found his nephew's again, and he felt a tear slide down his cheek as he continued, you have his smile. Your lip turns up in the corner before you truly smile. It gives you away every time. Your eyes are the same shape and width apart as his were. The color might be different, but sometimes when you gaze at your dragon, they go so dark that they are nearly black. Egg's eyes did it whenever he thought of dragons. It is a passionate look full of love. And in personality. You are young like him. You hide it well, but you are young and inexperienced. You want to think the best of people and of the world. You are trusting and you are naive, like him. That is not a criticism, nephew. Indeed, your willingness to think the best of people is one of the qualities I admire most in you. He was intelligent, fiercely so, and of quick wit. His tongue could deliver harsher lashings than a master's whip. Do not look at me like that, nephew. I have seen you speak to Sir Alisa Thorne. My brother would be proud of the barbs you have traded as am I in your defense of some of the recruits. As a child he was insolent and mindful of his birth. He grew out of it as he aged. He was also kind and compassionate. He cared about the small folk as he cared about the nobles. During one of the longest and harshest winters I have lived through, he sent shipments of grain and aid north to both noble houses and small folk alike. There are few who manage to have the love of small folk and nobles alike. My father was one. My brother, although the nobles laughed at him on occasion because the manner in which he was raised was unconventional, was liked. But not loved. He did things that upset the nobles and there were rebellions, but they still liked him. He is remembered as a good king. But, more than that, he was a good man. He did not do what he did because he wished to be loved. He did it because he believed it was the right thing. You miss him, John said softly, his eyes sad. I truly did not mean to upset you, uncle. You did not, he replied quickly, keen to ensure that John understood he was not upset. I will always miss Egg. I will always get sad when I think of Egg. He was my little brother, and I was not there for him. Eamon watched as John's hand reached out to run down Ghost's chest. The direwolf was spread out, across the floor, on his back with his legs in the air and his head lolling to one side as little snores left him. He cursed his stupidity. For a moment he had made John think of Bran, again. If my enemies could see him now, John remarked dryly, changing the topic. They would tremble in fear. A small belch interrupted them, and Eamon watched as John's eyes swung to the dragon who was emerging from under the bed, her preferred place to sleep, and tottering in a wobbly fashion towards her master. He smiled. Egg loved dragons. He dreamed of restoring dragons to House Targaryen. He believed it was his destiny. For all his good deeds, he had one major flaw, his desire to see dragons protecting the realm again and ensuring his changes to the lives of others stayed. House Targaryen did not need dragons. Dragons made us great, yes. But Targaryen kings and queens achieved so many things without dragons. Dragons were a curse on his rule. He wanted dragons to live so House Targaryen could be great again. And he wanted dragons to live to protect the small folk. I do not think a day went by in his life where he did not dream about restoring dragons to the world. A child's dream in the mind of a king, John said softly. Eamon felt a sad smile slip over his face. You remembered. John flushed. I try to commit all our talks to memory. It was Eamon's turn to flush. They settled into a slightly awkward but not uncomfortable silence for a few moments, only the crackling of flames making any noise. Eamon shifted slightly under the bedding to wrap himself more tightly in the sheets and, by the fireplace, John stretched out his legs, managing to dislodge the dragon on them, who huffed smoke at him and headed off towards Ghost, where she curled up in a ball on his exposed belly and went to sleep. Why did he want to help the small folk so much? He spent much of his youth as a squire for Sir Duncan the Tall, who later became Lord Commander of his Kingsguard. They met at the tourney of Ashford Meadow and became firm friends. I will not bore you with the details, but they travelled much, and my brother spent more time with the small folk than he did with nobles as a result. Sir Duncan came from Flea Bottom, the slum of King's Landing. You said before that he had a son named Duncan. Yes. Named for his best friend, Eamon said softly. Did he wish to be king? I do not think so. He loved the small folk, and he would have been happy spending his life living with them and making their lives better. Truly, other than returning dragons to the world, I believe that is all he wanted. You are like him in that respect, nephew. You want to help others even to the detriment of yourself and those around you. He was the fourth son of a fourth son. Men like that, as I have said before, do what they wish when they wish. They do not traditionally make good kings. They can make good kings as my brother and father did. But there is always something missing there, and, for my brother, it was grip. Oh, he was intelligent, and he was over 30 when he came to the throne. He was no young naive man. But he had spent his whole life doing what he wanted when he wanted. He squired with his best friend. He married for love. He named his firstborn son after a lowly knight. He felt more comfortable amongst the small folk than he did nobles. All of those things, they affected not just him but his children. His children saw how he did what he wished, despite the havoc and upset it caused, for example trying to extend the rights of small folk, and they wanted the same. His firstborn, Duncan, rejected the throne to marry for love. His second-born son, Jaehaerys, and his daughter, Shaera, married each other in secret. His third-born son broke his betrothal to Olenna Redwine, who is now Lady Tyrell and will be one of the women you must secure the support of, and stayed single for his entire life. The only child who did their duty was Roll, who married a Baratheon and who had no choice, for she was sent there as a child and had no chance to make her own decisions. They learned from him. As all children learn from their parents. There was a pregnant pause, and then John said, he could not have known what they would do. But if he did what he wished, then I am sorry, uncle, he was not a good king. A good man, but not a good king. Eamon quirked an eyebrow at him. A king should not do things just because they want to. They should do them because it is what is best for the realm. The realm includes the nobles and the small folk. A king should do what is best for both, and when he cannot do what is best for both, he should do as little damage to the other as possible. A king's duty is to the realm, not to himself, Jon said softly. Eamon sighed and closed his eyes. You need not apologize to me, nephew. You are right. My brother was a good man. He could have been a good king, but he made mistakes. That you understand that and are willing to say so is why, nephew, you will make the best king House Targaryen has had in centuries. Love is the death of duty *. You understand this better than anyone I have ever met. Jon gave him a puzzled look and Eamon pressed on. My brother loved the small folk, and it caused his death in the end as much as dragons did. The issues he faced during his reign, including the uprising from houses and scuffles, were brought about because of his desire to do good for the small folk, a wise and noble cause. But a cause that cannot be supported in isolation, without thinking through the consequences. His love for the small folk and the belief that only dragons could save House Targaryen and them, caused his doom. He had always wished to restore dragons. But eventually, he became convinced that only dragons were the way to achieve what he wished. His love for the small folk doomed him and led to the tragedy at Summerhall as much as all his other mistakes did. He sighed and leaned forward, the covers dropping slightly and exposing himself to the chill of the evening air. A king can only love if that love does not compete with his love for the realm. My brother loved his wife and his children as he should. But he loved the small folk as well, and he loved them more truly and more fiercely than he did the nobles. The realm, as you said, includes the nobles and the small folk. The realm must come first, always. You must remember that, nephew. Your desire to help those weaker than you, as you have done here with the new recruits, is a noble cause, but it will bring your doom if you let it. Remember, your duty above all else is to the realm. Always. Chapter 8, Siblings. Chapter text. Chapter summary. Ned arrives in White Harbor whilst Jon arrives in Greywater Watch. The ripples from Ned's exit from King's Landing begin to show themselves. In our interlude, we learn more about Benjen Stark. 298 AC. Ned. White Harbor was as beautiful as he remembered it. Huge docks that stretched nearly a mile out to the sea. He could no longer just smell the sea air and salt water. Instead, he could also smell the trees that surrounded the city, the smell of fish and the smell of animals in the city. To some it would have smelled awful, oppressive and overwhelming after so long at sea. To Ned, it smelled like freedom. Like home. As his ship sailed past Seal Rock, he turned his gaze upwards to where seagulls circled the fortified building. He spotted men's faces peering 50 feet down from the fortress to stare at their ship as it passed. At the base of the fortress were dozens of seals, snoozing in the crisp summer air. He smiled. There was just something about the smell and sights of the north that made him feel at home. This was a reminder never to leave the north again. Next to him, Wendell Marndale carefully barked orders to his men who were moving before he had finished speaking. The ship wended its way between other large vessels in the outer harbor towards the inner harbor. My father will be anxious to see you, Wendell said quietly when Ned remarked on how close they were coming to the main docks. I have spent my life at sea, Lord Stark. I know these docks like I know my right hand. This ship will fit. The closer we anchor to the city, the faster your household can disembark and the sooner you can speak to my father. And he was right. They sailed smoothly past all the ships in the outer harbor, fitting into gaps that Ned would not have thought possible. As they sailed into the inner harbor, past the mile-long wall that separated the two harbors and weighed anchor between the city wall and the Wolf's Den, Ned's mind turned to how to explain his actions to Wyman Marndale and the Northern Lords. He could not tell them about Jon. He would not. It was Jon's story to tell. Not Ned's. But he would tell them about the orders Robert gave, his worry about the children, and that was it. He would have to hope that that was enough. He knew for some, it would be. Those like Mage Mormont and Wyman Marndale would never countenance the death of a babe, and they would be horrified by the thought of the children of Cersei as not being Robert's. As fierce as Wyman and Mage were, they understood the value Ned placed on family and the sanctity of a babe in arms. Mage herself had lost children in the birthing bed, and women had lost a wife and a child in the birthing bed. They would understand. Those like Great John and Ricard would mock him for it, think he had gone weak, but they would still understand, and they would follow his lead. They would know that he could not sanction the murder of a girl the same age as his sons. It was those like Roose Bolton and the Lady Dustin that he did not think would react well. Though, mayhaps, he was wrong. Lord Wendell, he said softly, drawing the man's attention from where he had been barking orders to get the boats ready to cross the final distance to shore, when we land, I would like to visit the Godswood. There is one in the Wolf's Den. I will take you there myself. Thank you, he murmured. Can you arrange for Sansa and the members of my household to be taken to Newcastle and baths drawn up? Of course. Thank you. Once I have prayed, I would speak to you and your father. I assume that your brother has left by now to fortify Moat Cailin. There is much we must talk about. I'll send word to my father to ensure he is ready to receive you. He nodded and left the man to yelling orders at his men. ***. The Godswood in the Wolf's Den was the first place where, for months, he felt total peace. From the moment he stepped inside, with Sansa at his side, for she had refused to go with the household and demanded her right to follow her father, he felt as though all the weight and stress that had been on his shoulders since he had left Winterfell all those moons before had left. He stopped just over the threshold and threw his head back to bask in the crisp freshness of the air. I will wait here, Lord Stark. Do not rush. My father will not begrudge you time in front of your gods after so long in the South, Wendell said quietly, pulling Ned's attention back to the present. Thank you, Lord Wendell, he said, turning to give the man a small smile. Wendell. Lord Stark, you need not stand on ceremony here. Ned, he replied with a broader smile. He had missed the no-nonsense attitudes of the North. He walked forwards into the Godswood and towards the center where the weirwood tree stood. It was surrounded by dozens of smaller ones, but the one he was looking at was the biggest and largest he had seen anywhere but Winterfell. He truly felt like he was home. He stopped and stared at the red leaves, the white bark, and the face carved on the tree in front of him, and felt the tension ease away even more. Home. Next to him, he felt Sansa slide her hands into his. She did not say anything for a moment, but then she said quietly, I have missed the North. He turned his head down to look at the top of her head. Her eyes were fixed on the heart tree that arched up into the sky with broad branches that extended across the entire Godswood, red leaves reflecting the bright sunlight. She looked peaceful. A small smile was on her lips, all the stress of the previous weeks wiped away as her face tilted up to the sun. She had inadvertently mirrored his position of moments before. I spent years wanting to get away, father. To go south. To see the ladies in their pretty dresses. To see King's Landing. To go to court. Marry a prince. We are not even home yet, we are still 2 weeks from Winterfell. But I feel like I am home. The North is home. I cannot believe I ever wanted to leave, she said softly, turning to look at him. He wrapped an arm around her and pressed a kiss to the top of her head. I was the same at your age, mayhaps younger. I wanted to be different. To leave the North and not come back. I got to spend years in the Vale, and I did not miss my home, I missed the people, and I missed my family. But, I thought for years that I had found a new family. Yet, all that I thought I found in Robert and in Jon Arryn, I already had in my brothers and sister and in my father and mother. I did not miss the North when I was away, and yet when I came home after the war, I vowed I would never leave again. The South had claimed too many members of House Stark, and I vowed that it would not claim any more. I felt such peace being back in the North. And yet I did go south. I made the same mistake again. Now that I am home, I am reminded of why I made that vow all those years ago. Northerners do not belong in the South. Starks do not belong in the South. Starks belong in Winterfell. She looked up at him, her eyes the same shade of blue as Kat's, and said quietly, You did not have a choice, father. The king asked you and you could not say no to your king. She squeezed his hand and then said in a more panicked voice that carried in the silence of the Godswood, I do not ever want to leave again. Promise me you will not make me leave. He smiled gently at her, You will not have to. I promise. Mother will want me to marry in the South. He felt his lips twist slightly, I will speak to your mother. Sansa's face lit up and she turned to throw her arms around him, Thank you, father. Then she pulled back and turned her gaze back to the weirwood tree. Father. Yes, Sangza. Why did Uncle Benjen join the watch? You said that you vowed you would never send another Stark to the south again and that we belong in Winterfell, but Uncle Benjen is a ranger. Why did he leave Winterfell? Surely the lands beyond the wall are as dangerous as the south. He paused. The answer on the tip of his tongue. Then he sighed. No more lies. Remember all those things you said to Arya in King's Landing. How you hated her. He said quietly. When Sangza nodded, red blossoming across her cheeks even as she chewed on her lip, he continued, 5 and 10 years ago, when I returned after the war, I said something equally cruel to Benjen. Something I will never be able to take back. He left and joined the Night's Watch the following day, and the next time I saw him, he was in black. He joined the watch because of your argument. And the Night's Watch is for life. There was a long pause whilst Sangza chewed on her lip, her eyes darting around the godswood. Did he forgive you? With time. Did you forgive yourself? He felt his eyes widen, but before he could open his mouth, she continued, the things I said to Arya were awful, father. I was awful. Even if she forgives me, I do not know if I can forgive myself. I told her I wished it was Nymeria who had died. I told her I hated her and that I wished she would run away. He pulled her closer and gently lifted her chin up so he could stare into her eyes. You are a child, Sangza. I was 20 when I said those things to Benjen. I was 8 years older than you are now. If Benjen can forgive me for what I said, then Arya will forgive you, he said softly. When quiet tears ran down her face, he said, more forcefully, you are her sister. There is not a crime you could commit, not a word you could say, not an act you could do that would stop her loving you. Families fight, Sangza. It is how we respond to those fights that matters. Do not be too hard on yourself. She nodded. I hope Arya forgives me. She will, he said, running a hand down her cheek and wiping away the last of her tears. She might make you work for it, however. But she will forgive you. Then he smiled softly at her, do not feel you must wait whilst I pray. Lord Wendell has told servants to have a bath drawn for you. I will not be long. She shook her head forcefully. No, I do not wish to leave. Then she turned and took a small step towards the tree. Do you think maybe I could pray with you? He smiled and took a step forward so he was level with her and held out his arm so she could grasp it, as Kat would have done. When she wrapped her hand carefully around his arm and leaned against him, he smiled more widely. Mayhaps the time they spent in the south hadn't been a complete waste. Sangza had never prayed in the Godswood before, and yet today she had not only voluntarily followed him here, but she also wanted to pray with him. He helped her down to her knees and watched her as she leaned forward to place her hand on the trunk, her eyes squeezed shut in concentration and her mouth moving silently. He smiled softly to himself and then leaned back so he was kneeling, but sitting on his feet, bowed his head, and prayed to the old gods. ****. He spent several hours with Sangza in the peace and silence of the Godswood before he decided he was ready. He rose but paused when Sangza did not move. It took a few moments, but, eventually, she raised her head and said softly, I wish to stay a bit longer, father. I will ask Lord Wendell to send some guards to wait for you, he replied before he gave her shoulder a light squeeze, turned, and left the safety of the Godswood. He was surprised when he exited the sacred space to see not only Lord Wendell waiting for him, but 2 members of the Stark household guard and Lord Wyman. He gave his men orders to wait for Sangza and then greeted his old friend. Wyman, it is good to see you, my friend, he murmured as he stepped forward and drew the larger man in for a forceful clap on the back. You look well. Ned. I wish I could say it was good to see you, but I fear you have news that I will not like, Wyman responded as he stepped back, although the smile on face indicated that he was still pleased to see Ned, regardless of his comments. He felt his lips twist into a slight scowl. Shall we walk? Can I assume that we are safe to speak freely between now and Newcastle? There is a path that takes us directly from here to Newcastle. We will not need to traps through the city. You can speak freely, Wyman replied as he turned and began to walk down the main path. Once they were out of sight of the Godswood, Wyman turned abruptly between some trees where there was no discernible path and, without looking back, stepped into the woods. Ned turned to glance at Wendell, who made a gesture and indicated he would bring up the rear, and so Ned followed hastily after Wyman. They walked in silence for several minutes through the undergrowth, which grew steadily thicker and thicker as they went. Just as Ned was about to question whether Wyman had, finally, lost his mind, they tumbled out from behind several thorny rose bushes onto a cobbled path littered with tufts of grass. Either side of the path rose bushes and thistles grew head-height, making it impossible for anyone to pass. "It is not an easy walk, so you will need to keep an eye on your feet," Wyman said unapologetically as Ned drew level with him. "It is an unused path then?" Ned asked as they began slowly walking uphill. "Aye. It is our escape route should we ever need to flee White Harbor. Unlikely, but I am sure you have the same contingencies in Winterfell. The path continues down to the Bight. There is a small harbor completely invisible to ships sailing past where we keep a vessel always waiting," Wyman replied, beginning to huff as he struggled with the steep path. "My sons and I walk it twice a year to ensure that it remains untrodden. It has one path off towards the Godswood. It is known to all Mandaealis." Then he grinned and smiled at Ned. "And now to you, my friend." "I thank you for sharing this with me," he replied softly. "You need not thank me. If there is ever a day where House Mandaeali cannot trust House Stark with its secrets, then we will all be in trouble," Wyman said softly. Then he sighed. "I have known you since you were a boy, Ned. You have never been good at hiding your emotions. So, do you plan on telling me what is wrong, or shall we continue talking escape routes?" Behind him, Ned heard Wendell draw a sharp intake of breath. He sighed. "I did not write to you asking for you to send a ship to King's Landing, Lord Varys did," he said quietly. "Varys? The Spider? I do not know why. But he wanted me safely gone from King's Landing." Ned watched as Wyman turned and exchanged a dark look with Wendell. "Tell us all you know, Ned. Wendell and I have spent more time in King's Landing than any other northerner. If there is a game being played, we shall help you figure it out." Ned smiled at him. "I thank you, my friend." Then he sighed. "Lord Varys approached me in the Godswood in the Red Keep. He suggested that I stop looking into Jon Arryn's death. Have you heard anything about it?" Wyman shook his head. "No. But the consensus was that he was healthy until he wasn't, if you get my meaning." Ned felt his nose and mouth curl slightly. "I." Then he heaved out about sigh. "What we discuss here stays between us until I have decided what to do." Wyman nodded. "Of course. I have my suspicions that the Queen's children are not the King's," Ned said quietly, his eyes fixed on Wyman as the man halted suddenly. Wyman spun on the spot to face Ned, his eyes blown wide. "You are sure? The boy, Gendry. That is why you have brought him north?" Wendell said before Ned could reply to his father. "What boy?" "He is the King's bastard," he replied. "And I. That's why I have brought him north. He is the oldest of the ones I managed to find out about by rights. Even as a bastard, he has more of a claim on that throne than the other children." "These are serious allegations," Ned, Wyman murmured as they started walking again. Father Wendell interjected. "You have not seen Gendry. He looks exactly like Robert. He looks like a Baratheon. The other children, they do not look like Robert. You have seen them with your own eyes. Wylla does not look like Willis." "But I am not shouting that she is a bastard," Wyman responded blithely. He eyed Ned cautiously and then continued. "You are sure, Ned? You are sure that they are not Robert's sons?" "I cannot prove it, but I have my suspicions. I believe the Jon Arryn found out and was killed for it. His squire also knew and is now dead. I think Lord Varys is aware but, of course, is good at keeping it to himself. If you have raised these suspicions in King's Landing, you'd be dead." Ned flinched. Knowing it to be true and knowing how close he had come to doing exactly that. "Did you bring the boy north to start a war, Ned?" Wyman asked after several moments of silence. "No," he replied shortly. "But I think a war is inevitable." He watched as Wyman and Wendell exchanged looks again. "You plan to contest the prince's claim when Robert dies?" "I do not know," he answered honestly. "But when Robert dies, and I think it will be soon given how poorly he is treating himself, I will need to go south to swear fealty to Joffrey. All the lords will. How can I go south to swear fealty to a boy that I believe is a bastard born of incest?" But how I can put the North in danger for something I cannot prove. Wyman and Wendell exchanged another long look until, eventually, Wendell nodded. Wyman sighed loudly and said, in a manner that suggested he was quite perturbed he had to say anything at all, for the answer should have been obvious: House Marndale will stand with House Stark as we have for 1,000 years. Whatever you decide, Ned, we will be with you. 298 AC Jon Snow. Greywater Watch was not what he had imagined. He remembered stories from his childhood of how when the Andals had arrived in Westeros they had tried to conquer Greywater Watch and had ridden in their thousands, through the centuries, into the bogs and marshland of the Neck and never returned. And so, when he had imagined Greywater Watch, he had expected something completely impregnable, a huge castle with dozens of towers and hundreds of soldiers. Instead, what he discovered was a castle on a crannog, floating through the swamps and bogs, with a single drawbridge, no manned towers and perhaps less than 24 soldiers. It was small, mayhaps a quarter of the size of Winterfell. If it had been anywhere but the Neck, he imagined it would have been conquered repeatedly over the years. When he had asked Howland Reed if he was correct in why the castle seemed so unassuming, the man had smiled at him and simply replied, Greywater Watch is a home first, John. We live a simple life here. We do not need a fortress to keep us safe. The land keeps us safe. The swamps and the land within the Neck move for us. Not with us. If they sense danger, then we move. If they sense that we need help, then help is provided. There is nothing that the Neck will not do for those who live within its boundaries. It is our home. We are linked to the Neck and the Neck to us. It looks after and provides for us, and we do the same in return. As he stood on the battlements watching a group of Crannog men depart through the lowered drawbridge, he smiled to himself. They were simply armed with spears on their backs and nets that some of the men carried. When Jon had queried how unarmed they appeared, they had laughed and said they had nothing to fear in the Neck. They were laughing and joking so loudly that they appeared to have no care in the world, and he wondered how successful their hunt would be with all the noise they were making. At the front, Meera Reed was throwing her arms about as she spoke to her father, a smile bright on her face. Next to Howland Reed, Ghost lolloped along, almost bouncing up and down in his excitement. Above them, Winter circled over here, letting out tiny caws. He leaned forward and smiled as Ghost toppled over the side of the drawbridge, having spotted something in the water, and into the swamp below with a startled yelp. The direwolf was soon back on a crannog, shaking himself off with an air of complete happiness, his tongue hanging out of his mouth and his eyes bright. Ghost loved it here, and so did Jon. They were safe and they could relax. Winterfell had been his home for years, but it had never felt like home. In his few days at Greywater Watch he had felt more comfortable than he had anywhere else in the world. He had expected to be stared at and laughed at, to be mocked for not swearing his vows to the Night's Watch. He had expected men to run from Winter and from Ghost. But they had not. There had been some cautiousness at first, but the minute that Howland Reed had declared Jon to be Ned Stark's son and Ghost and Winter to be his, the men and women that called Greywater Watch home had welcomed him with open arms. They had just accepted him. They had shared their bread and mead with him willingly. They had approached him to talk to him and ask about Ghost and Winter. They had happily stroked both his direwolf and, when she would let him, his dragon. They had sparred with him and joked with him and shared stories with him. They had all wanted to sit with him and hear what the Wall was like. And they had not called him a bastard once. They had not called him a coward for not joining the Watch. He was just Jon. She will grow to be bigger than Balerion, a quiet voice said from next to him. He jumped and turned to gaze down at Hojan Reed, who stood a few feet away, despite how close his voice had made him sound. Where Meera was bright and full of joy, Hojan was quieter. Jon supposed that many would consider him sullen, but to Jon it did not come across that way. Instead, he saw a boy whose personality was similar to his own, reserved. He had wondered what had caused Hojan Reed to age before his time, because that was what made Hojan different to Meera and to anyone else, not that he was quieter, but that he was more mature. A man trapped in a boy's body. Much like Jon. Only different. Because Jon knew what ailed him, the knowledge of who he was. But he did not know and could not begin to imagine what plagued Hojan Reed. The boy was a mystery. Jon was not going to pry, though, it was not his business. "Do you think so, he responded as he turned back to glance at the departing group of Crannog men as they disappeared between the trees. Hojan did not reply as the drawbridge rose, giving it time to slide into place and for the world to return to peace. Then he walked closer until Jon could see him out of the corner of his eyes. He leaned against the battlements, his gaze fixed on Winter, who was now swooping over the tops of trees likely above where the Crannog men were. "I know it. We cannot know what the future holds," Jon said quietly. He so desperately wanted to believe that Winter would grow to be huge because that would mean she would survive for years after he was gone. That she would be okay. Hojan ripped his eyes away from Winter to stare at Jon. He did not speak until Jon turned away from Winter and met the other boy's eyes. "Do you believe in magic?" "I suppose I have no choice. How else can I explain Winter?" "Then if you believe in magic, you must believe that some things are known. Your Maester Lewin told you about Greensight and about wargs, as did Old Nan," the boy replied, a knowing smile on his lips. He told me about both," he replied, his eyes still fixed on Hojan's moss green ones. Then it was like the pieces just slotted together. "Greensight?" The boy nodded. "I am sorry." Hojan's eyes widened, but he did not say anything. "Old Nan told me that it is a curse as much as a blessing. That a Greenseer can change the course of history if they are lucky enough to understand the messages they are being given. But they can also see their own deaths and those of their loved ones. She said she would not wish it on anyone when my brother, Bran, said that he wished he could see the future. I am sorry it sounds like a heavy burden." Hojan flinched and they settled into a slightly awkward silence, both turning to stare at Winter, who was still circling above the tree line. "You say she will grow to be bigger than Balerion?" Jon eventually asked. Hojan inclined his head. Then he said quietly, "You worry for her. You need not. She will not be alone for long. One day she will have brothers and sisters. She will have children of her own. You are sure?" Jon breathed out, his voice catching at the end. Hojan turned to face him, eyes bright and full of joy for the first time since Jon had met him. "I have dreamt of a dozen dragons circling the skies of King's Landing, whilst in the dragon pit half a dozen direwolves howl in joy, and in the seas a kraken and a merman lay intertwined." He twisted his lips in a wry smile. "I can only imagine what the second half means, but I cannot believe that a dozen dragons in the sky can mean anything else than the rebirth of dragons. You are not the last Targaryen, Jon Snow. And Winter is not the last dragon." "Do you know when?" he asked quietly. Hojan shook his head. "No. But one day." "You are sure?" "One day." Jon smiled and turned back to watch Winter as she circled above the tree line in the distance. Even from here, he knew she had heard the conversation and understood, from their link, the joy in his heart. It may have been his imagination, but he thought the roar she let out sounded more fearsome and stronger than any of the other ones she had let out since birth. 298 AC Olenna Tyrell. "Mother. Have you heard what has happened?" Mace boomed loudly even as he barged into her solar without so much as a knock first. She sighed and put down the scroll she was reading and peered at him over the top of her glasses. The downside, she had found, of growing old, that her senses were beginning to worsen. Her eyesight, in particular, was not what it once was. Her distance vision remained spectacular, but reading scrolls and letters was becoming increasingly tedious. As, it turned out, was dealing with Mace. There was a long drawn-out silence. "Until you tell me what you think you know, I cannot tell you if I know that it has happened," she eventually bit out, patience wearing thin as Mace huffed and puffed in her doorway. As he huffed out a few more deep breaths and struggled to regain control of his breathing, she leaned back in her chair to rest her elbows on the arms of it and steeple her fingers together so she could prop her chin up on it and peer at him. In truth, she had absolutely no idea what had worked him up into such a frenzy. Usually the only things to get him so excited were a good meal or a tournament. They had not had a tournament for some time, and tonight's dinner was to be boar. So, neither of them were possibilities. But she was not about to let Mace know that she had no idea what he was so exercised about. The secret to dealing with Mace was to never let him think he was in charge or had caught anyone unawares. He was insufferable otherwise and likely to cock it up somehow. "Ned Stark." Mace eventually huffed out. She raised an eyebrow. "I am familiar with the man." "Doe. Honorable." Has so many children, it's a wonder he can remember all their names. He's resigned as Hand of the King. He's taken his entire household back north. Then Mace dropped his voice to a whisper and said in a very pleased with himself manner, apparently, he did not even tell the king he was leaving. He just threw his badge down onto the table in the small council and departed that same afternoon. She resisted the urge to lean forward in surprise. Now this was news. But, instead of letting her excitement shine through, for now House Tyrell could potentially have a shot at having someone as Hand of the King and secure a betrothal, as Robert Baratheon was not going to take this laying down, she merely said, "Have you been in the Gold again?" Mace blinked at her, eyes wide. Then he hastily crossed the room, letting the door that had been resting against his side slam shut, and pulled out the chair in front of her desk. He sat down heavily, the chair creaking in protest, and beamed at her. "No, Mother. Laura's told me. Apparently, the small council is furious. They are considering what to do next. The king has forbidden them from acting, for now. But he too is furious." She nodded, unwilling to let Mace know that this was indeed news that she had not already heard from her spies. Did Loras have any more insight? Mace shook his head. "No." She sighed. "Useless. Come, let us go and see what Loras has to say. I sincerely doubt that is all he knows." She rose and crossed out from behind her desk and was across the room, heaving open the door before Mace had even twitched. "Mace." He followed. Asterisk asterisk. 3 hours later, Olenna was back in her solar, enjoying the peace and quiet that Loras' return from King's Landing offered her. Mace and Aeleri were fluttering around their favorite son with the air of parents who had never expected to see him again in their lives, despite the fact he returned every other moon to see them. Meanwhile, Willers was off doing what he did best, reading, Margaery was holding court, and Garland was walking the gardens with Leonette. With Mace and Aeleri occupied, no one would disturb her for several more hours. She stared out over the Mandaya River. So, Ned Stark had fled King's Landing rather than be party to the murder of the unborn babe of Daenerys Targaryen. Interesting. She had known, of course, that he had reacted poorly to the murder of Aegon and Rhaenys all those years before. But then, so had most people with any sense of decency. She had. But she had done it quietly. Unlike Ned Stark, who had yelled it from the rooftops of King's Landing for all to hear, which had, in her opinion, been a foolish mistake. If Robert Baratheon had not been so upset about the death of Lyanna Stark, then Ned Stark might well have lost his head there and then. Robert Baratheon had never liked being questioned, and, by then, he hated the Targaryens. The only good Targaryen, in his eyes, was a dead Targaryen. Clearly, a mantra he had stuck with all these years. Ned Stark had, in many ways, been lucky that Robert was otherwise distracted and so had not acted. Back then, House Tyrell had not needed to rock the boat more than it had already been rocked by their actions during the rebellion. So, she had stayed silent even as her heart had broken and her nails had dug grooves into the palms of her hand in the effort not to gasp in horror when she had heard the news. She had not expected it. She had known that war made men do disgusting things, but she did not think a babe in arms and a young girl would be so callously killed. When she had later found out it had been sanctioned, words had failed her for the first time in her life. But she had thought that would be the end of it, that life would go on. That babes in arms would never suffer that fate again. She had not agreed with the actions and decisions no decent person would that Tywin Lannister and his men had made. But she had recognized what could have driven Robert Baratheon to celebrate the death of 2 children. It didn't make his reaction right. But she could see why he would react in such a way. Love was a powerful motivator, and the fate Lyanna Stark had suffered, she had known men worse for less. The years had healed her wounds and those of those around her. Yet here they were 15 years later, and Robert Baratheon was, once again, plotting the murder of babes. It was hard for her now not to wonder if a similar fate might have met her own grandchildren had Mace done more than sit outside the walls of Storm's End during the rebellion. She watched as a hawk swooped past her window, a small dormouse in its talons, and sighed. What to do? Frankly, she did not care about the unborn Targaryen babe. It was a curiosity at the edge of the world and mattered little to her life, or those of her children and grandchildren. She didn't like the idea of a babe being murdered, but she was not going to scream and shout about it. She doubted many people cared about the babe or its mother's fate. She was not going to put her house and her family at risk for a babe that bore no blood relation to them and never would. No. What she cared about was what this meant for House Tyrell. Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon had weathered so much together. Yet, by Laura's account, the thought of a babe of no relation to him being murdered was enough for Ned Stark to turn his back on his friend. Honorable he might be, but he had kept his silence over Rhaenys and Aegon for 15 years after his one outburst. What had changed? What had made Ned Stark turn away from his friend and sail back north that same day? Something was brewing. Something was different. She was missing something. The easiest thing would be to talk to Ned Stark and find out what was going on. She was more than capable of wringing secrets out of a man like Ned Stark. But given the man was likely already back in the north already, that was out of the question. She could, of course, go north herself. But she didn't want to. She couldn't send Mace. He was useless. He might, actually, be worse than useless. Willers, then. If Willers went, then she could stay here and keep an eye on Mace. Willers would take over from his father one day and was, technically, already doing most of the governance of the Reach. This would be a good test of whether he had taken on board the many lessons that Olenna had given him over the years. A good test without placing him in danger. It was, after all, not a risky mission. Just a mystery begging to be solved, and, since no one in King's Landing seemed to know what had caused Ned Stark to react the way he had, there was little choice but to send someone north to puzzle it all out. And Olenna did so love knowing what made people tick. Ned Stark was no exception. Willers would be safe in the north. She shifted slightly, eyes fixed back on the Mandaya. Perhaps she should send Margaery as well. Ned Stark did, after all, have a daughter about Margaery's age, and Margaery really was very good at getting information out of silly girls. He had a son as well. What Margaery didn't get out of the daughter, she would almost certainly be able to wrestle from the son. Yes. Willers and Margaery. 298 AC Oberyn Martell. He smiled at his brother as he leaned back on his chair. One day, you will push that chair back so far that you will be unable to stop your journey backwards and crack your head on the floor, Doran said softly without looking up from the letter he was glaring at. And you shall weep for me, dear brother. Doran raised his eyes to stare waspishly at him. Or I shall just have you buried and pray that none of my nieces are as foolish as their father. Oberyn felt the scowl cross his face before he could stop it. Doran met his gaze dead on and smiled. You are not smiling for me, he said, ignoring their previous conversation. The front two legs of his chair the floor with a thud. I am not, his brother said, eyes bright and burning. He was more animated than he had been in years. The gout that plagued Doran often caused him to be pensive and miserable. The pain and inability to function without support was a curse on his brother who was once so proud and so independent. It affected his mood daily and impacted on those he loved. To see his brother's eyes so full of life after moons of misery pulled at Oberyn's heart in a way that he had not felt since he held Lorza in his arms for the first time. He prayed that whatever had caused his brother's good mood would not turn out to be another disappointment or letdown. His brother could not take more disappointment or pain. He held out his hand expectantly and, as soon as Doran placed the scroll in his hand, turned his attention to it and read it. Robert Baratheon plans to kill the Targaryen children. Ned Stark has resigned in protest and returned north. For now, all is calm. I do not expect it to remain so. He felt his eyebrow raise in surprise. I wonder what Robert Baratheon did to upset his friend so. Surely this cannot be about Viserys and Daenerys, he murmured. Then he raised his eyes to Doran, who was scowling. Who is this from, brother? A trusted informant. You do not trust anyone but me. Doran gave him a twisted smile. That is true. He leaned forward, bracing his elbows on Doran's desk so that he could stare his brother in the eye. What do you need from me, brother? Doran's gaze turned pensive. Come. He gestured at Aeryo and the man stepped forward, silent as ever, to wheel his brother towards the balcony of Doran's solar in the Water Gardens. Oberyn followed. Doran was soon settled in position and able to look over the main courtyard of the Water Gardens. As he drew level, Oberyn saw his youngest children being chased by Orianne through jets of water bubbling up from the ground in thick sprays that, when they reached their full height of about 7 feet, collapsed inwards and covered the ground 4 meters around in thousands of tiny droplets of water. In the heat of the Dornish sun, the water was a welcome respite that the children made the most of. Even as he watched, Elia skidded across the ground after losing her footing and crashed into a passing guard, sending them both flying into one of the orange trees. The force sent oranges tumbling onto the ground. Oberyn hid a smile as Elia righted herself and, having yelled a quick apology, took off running again, leaving the guard on the floor with oranges scattered around him. "It heartens me to see them so happy," Doran said softly, his eyes fixed on his daughter who had managed to capture Doya and was dragging her towards the biggest fountain, clearly intent on throwing her in. "Would that they could stay so." "They are happy here," Oberyn remarked. "As am I." "As are you," his brother replied softly. "You need me to leave," he said after a few moments of quiet. "I need to know what happened, Oberyn. A man like Ned Stark does not act rashly. Even during the war, every move he made was calculated. He was the true brains behind Robert's victory. That man has acted rashly 3 times in 20 years, once when his sister was taken, once when our niece and nephew were murdered, and once when he fathered a bastard. That he has resigned rather than be party to the murder of a child is most unusual. It was a drastic move that could have cost him greatly. That he did so for a girl and a babe he has never met, and whose family caused him so much pain, makes it stranger. More importantly, if there is a void emerging between the two friends, we need to know. Our time might be coming sooner than we imagined." "When shall I leave?" "Sunrise." "So soon?" "If our time has come, brother, then we need to know soon. If our time has not yet come, then we need to know how to exploit these developments. Either way, time is against us. This news is at least a moon old. Ned Stark will be back in the north now, and Robert will likely have forgotten this like the small council won't have, however. You need to find out what happened, whether we can exploit it, and what we should do next," Doran said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the children. "Very well. Shall we dine together tonight?" Doran shook his head. "Spend time with Ellaria and your daughters." "They shall stay here, I could use the company." Oberyn hid a smile, understanding that his brother was not saying that he wanted Ellaria and the girls to stay to stop them from going with Oberyn, but because he did not wish them to be away from him when his last sibling was heading back to the place that had caused them so much heartache. He wanted to keep what remained of his family close. "Of course. I will see you soon, brother," he said loudly as he leaned across the distance between where he stood and Doran's chair and clapped his brother on the shoulder. He was halfway across the room before Doran spoke again. "Brother." Oberyn spun on the spot to face Doran. "Yes." Doran did not turn around, his eyes still fixed on the children playing below as he said, "Be safe. I cannot lose another sibling. Take no risks. Return once you have the information we need." 298 AC Aemon Targaryen, flashback. They were sequestered in Aemon's room again, as they were every evening. Every night they spoke on all manner of topics from politics to family, eager to get to know each other in the few weeks they would have together. Nothing was too awkward to discuss. Nothing was off limits. No secrets. That was their promise to each other the first night they had sat together as a family. Tonight, it was Benjen's turn to speak to their nephew and Jon's turn to ask. Aemon shifted on the bed, trying to get comfortable, a difficult feat with a dragon on one side of his bed and the direwolf on the other side. Both were curled up into small balls, but still managing to take up an inordinate amount of space. That being said, they were keeping him nice and warm, and it was comforting to have them so close when he knew they would be gone soon. He repressed a shiver as he thought of them and Jon out in the north alone. Next to fireplace, Benjen and Jon sat on the floor, a finished game of Sivas between them. Looking at the two of them together, it was easy to see how Jon had been so successfully hidden as a Stark all these years. He looked like Benjen did all those years ago when he had arrived at the Night's Watch. A young man of 6 and 10. Barely a man. Still a child in Aemon's eyes. Gods, Benjen was still a child now in Aemon's eyes. He sighed and shifted again, nudging Ghost, who gave him a baleful look as he rose and spun on the spot before settling down again. The direwolf rested his head gently on Aemon's thighs, gazing at his master across the room. "What did you wish to discuss tonight, Jon?" Benjen said once Ghost had settled. Jon did not speak for a moment, his eyes fixed on his uncle. Eamon smiled at the sight. John was studying Benjen, trying to get a read on Benjen's mood. He was learning. "I wondered if you could tell me why you joined the watch," John said after several moments' silence, eyes still fixed on Benjen. Eamon sucked in a quick intake of breath, but neither John nor Benjen gave any acknowledgement they had heard him. He leaned back in his bed, against the pillows, and threaded one of his hands through Ghost's fur, trying to ground himself. Underneath his hand, the direwolf shifted slightly and shoved his head further into Eamon's thigh. The move almost felt like the direwolf was reassuring him. "You truly wish to know, John?" Benjen eventually asked, carefully avoiding his nephew's eyes, and instead gazing into the fireplace. "It is not a happy story. I want to know why you came here." "Very well," Benjen said quietly. He heaved out a sigh and scooted over to the fireplace until he was leaning backwards against one of the big outside pillars, his legs pulled up as though to protect himself. He wrapped his arms around his knees and rested his chin on them as he gazed at his nephew. 5 and 10 years ago, Ned brought you back from Dawn, and the day after I joined the watch." "Why?" Eamon clenched his fingers more tightly around Ghost's fur. Benjen had never told him why he had joined the watch all those years ago. Eamon had never asked, but he could remember it like it was yesterday. A young Benjen Stark, barely 6 and 10, arriving alone at the wall to swear himself to the watch there and then straight-backed and proud, but sad. It had made no sense then. The boy had clearly not wanted to be there. It made sense now though. Now Eamon thought about it. Ned, he wished to claim you as his bastard. To raise you as his own and to protect you, to keep you safe. He thought that by claiming you as a bastard and never telling you of your birthright that you would be safe. Happy. That is what he did. "I wouldn't say I was happy though, safe, perhaps," John said softly, eyes still fixed on his uncle. I tried to stop him. I told him that I would take you, raise you as my own son. That I would forsake a wife and instead raise you as my own, in my own keep, and that one day you could swear yourself as a cadet branch of House Stark to Robb. He would not let you. He said everyone knew you were his bastard. That did not matter to me. I wanted to claim you as mine. I felt it would give you a chance to live your life away from Lady Caitlin. It would have been better for you and for her. Fairer on both of you. She would not be reminded of her husband's infidelity, and you would grow up being loved without the scorn of being a bastard hovering over you. We argued all night over it. As I said, Ned refused. He said he had to keep you close, that he had promised your mother," Benjen said quietly. Then he laughed, a dark and bitter sound that Eamon had never heard from the man before. "I told him he wasn't worthy of raising Lyanna's son. That he had been away for years, that he did not know who Lyanna was. That he was no more her brother than he was mine." Benjen choked out a sob, and there was a brief pause whilst he calmed himself down. "We argued. We both said things that were unforgivable. That we can never take back. He told me I was no brother of his and that he would raise you as his, and the matter was closed. The next day I rode north rather than stay there and watch you suffer. I swore my vows the day I arrived, and I have stayed here ever since." There was a long pause whilst John stared at his uncle. "You left me. You did not fight," he said eventually, his voice quiet. "I had no choice. I could not take you and run. I had nowhere to go." "Where was I to go, John? I had no friends. I had no family, except Ned. I had nowhere to go. I couldn't take you and live in the woods." Eamon watched as John opened his mouth, clearly intent on arguing that, in his opinion, Benjen should have done exactly that, and then closed it again. "I know," John said quietly. "I know. Ned was right. I had no business in raising you. I would not have been able to look after you, and you would have grown up alone without any brothers or sisters," Benjen said quietly. "I regret my actions. I swore myself to the Night's Watch in spite. I did not do it for the right reasons. I did it because I had lost my father, my sister, and my brother in a year. And then I was forced to lose you, when you were all I had left of Lyanna. You were young. You made a mistake," John said softly. Benjen gave John a wan smile. "It is kind of you to say so. But I should have stayed and fought for you. I should never have let you grow up like that. If you had not done so, Uncle, then I would never have thought to join the Night's Watch myself. I would never have come here. I would never have met Uncle Eamon. I would never have hatched my dragon, Jon replied as he gestured to the dragon who was still asleep. My life might have been better with you, but I would have missed out on so much. Can you forgive me? What for? Jon said, bafflement leaking through in his voice and his body language as he leaned forward in confusion. For abandoning you in a childish fit of anger. Jon scooted forward to close the distance between himself and Benjen, knocking the Savas pieces over in the process, until he could wrap his arms around his uncle. There is nothing to forgive, uncle, he said softly. You were the same age then that I am now, and as much as I would like to think I would act differently, I am not sure I would. Over the top of Jon's shoulder, Benjen met Eamon's eyes. Eamon gave him a soft smile and a nod, for Jon was right, there was nothing to forgive. Chapter 9, Blood. Chapter text. Chapter summary, Arya arrives at the wall and the Stark party return home. Howland and Jon talk. In our interlude,